A stolen convoy, a cartel death squad, and one lawman who doesn't follow the rules. Open Roads. A modern Western noir crime thriller. Chapter 1. The heat out here did not just sit, it pressed. It bore down on the asphalt of Highway 62, until the road shimmered like a mirage of water that never got any closer. Bowen Rhodes kept the air conditioning in the blacked-out 98 Suburban cranked to the max, a mechanical roar battling the silent, oppressive microwave outside. He adjusted the brim of his Stetson, tapping the steering wheel with a rhythm that didn't match the radio. The dashboard clock read 2:14 p.m. The temperature gauge read hell. He saw the pillar of smoke 5 miles out. It rose straight up, a black, oily finger accusing the bleached blue sky. Bowen knew smoke. He knew the white drift of burning mesquite, the gray haze of a grass fire, and the thick yellow choke of a house fire. This stood apart. This smoke rolled heavy and dark, greasy with hydrocarbons. It meant diesel fuel. It meant rubber tires melting into sludge. It meant high-test accelerant burning hot enough to warp steel. It meant trouble. Bowen lifted his foot off the gas, letting the heavy SUV coast. The silence of the engine drop allowed the tire hum to take over. He watched the black column thicken. Someone had lit a funeral pyre in the middle of the scrubland. He checked his fuel gauge. Quarter tank. Enough to get to the fire, maybe not enough to chase whatever ran away from it. A rusted sign on the right announced the last drop, liquor and bait. The building matched the sign, corrugated metal peeling white paint like sunburned skin, windows barred with iron that had seen better decades. A single dusty sedan sat out front, door hanging open. Bowen signaled, the blinker clicking a slow, lazy beat, and pulled off the highway. Gravel crunched under the Suburban's all-terrain tires. He parked next to the sedan, noting the engine ticking from heat. A Ford Taurus, 5 years old, bald tires. The driver's side door handle had a dent next to it, like someone tried to pry it open with a screwdriver once. He killed the engine. The silence rushed in, followed instantly by the heat as he opened the door. It hit him like a physical blow, smelling of dust and creosote. He grabbed his sunglasses from the visor, slid them on, and stepped out. The asphalt of the parking lot felt soft under his boots. He pushed the door to the shop open. A bell jingled, a cheerful sound that died instantly in the heavy, stagnant air of the store. The inside smelled of stale beer, pine cleaner, and fear. "I said open the damn safe, old man." The voice cracked. High pitch. Adrenaline and youth. Bowen let the door close behind him. The latch clicked. 2 men stood at the counter. The one doing the shouting wore a hoodie despite the 100-degree weather, the hood pulled up, a red bandana covering the lower half of his face. He held a revolver, looks like a .38 Saturday Night Special, sideways, shaking like a leaf in a gale. The second man, taller, wearing a stained denim jacket, worked a crowbar against the register drawer. Behind the counter, a man with skin like wrinkled parchment and eyes wide as saucers held his hands up. He barely breathed. Bowen walked to the cooler on the left wall. He opened the glass door. The hum of the compressor filled the room. The kid with the gun spun around. "Hey. Don't move. You deaf?" Bowen ignored him. He studied the selection. Budweiser. Coors. A lonely 6-pack of Shiner Bock. He grabbed the Shiner. He closed the cooler door. It shut with a solid thud. "I'm talking to you, cowboy." The kid leveled the .38 at Bowen's chest. The barrel wavered in erratic circles. Bowen turned. He held the beer in his left hand. He looked at the kid, then at the man with the crowbar who had stopped prying to stare. "You boys are in a lot of trouble," Bowen said. His voice sounded like gravel grinding together. "And I don't mean the law." "Shut up," the kid screamed. "Get on the floor. Wallet on the ground. Now." "You're driving a Ford Taurus with bald tires," Bowen said. He walked toward the counter, slow, deliberate steps. "Which means you probably can't afford the gas to get back to El Paso, let alone outrun a radio call. And you," he looked at the crowbar man. "You're sweating through a denim jacket. You reek." "Shoot him, Mikey," the crowbar man yelled. Bowen didn't stop. He didn't rush. He just kept moving, closing the distance. Mikey won't shoot. The safety is on. I can see the red paint from here. Or rather, I can't. Mikey looked down at the gun. That was the amateur mistake. The distraction. Bowen moved. The lethargy of the heat vanished. He took 2 long strides, invading the kid's space. His right hand lashed out, not for the gun, but for the wrist. He gripped bone and tendon, twisting sharply outward. The kid screamed. The .38 clattered to the linoleum. Bowen didn't let go. He drove a knee into the kid's midsection, folding him like a cheap lawn chair. As the kid gasped for air, Bowen shoved him backward into a display of potato chips. Bags exploded, showering the floor in foil and salt. The crowbar man roared and swung the iron bar. A wide, telegraphed haymaker. Bowen sidestepped. He watched the bar whistle past his ear, cutting the air. He caught the man's arm on the downswing, using the momentum. He pivoted, driving his elbow into the man's nose. Cartilage crunched. Blood sprayed across the counter. The man dropped the crowbar, clutching his face, stumbling back. Bowen drew the Glock 19 from his hip holster. He didn't point it at their heads. He pointed it at the crowbar man's right knee. "Stay down," Bowen said. The man groaned, blood leaking through his fingers. "You broke my nose." "I'll break the leg next," Bowen said. "Sit." The man sat. Bowen looked at the kid in the chips. He groaned, clutching his stomach, trying to remember how to breathe. Bowen holstered the Glock. He placed the 6-pack of Shiner on the counter. He reached into his back pocket, pulled out a money clip, and peeled off a 20. He slid it across the Formica to the terrified clerk. "For the beer," Bowen said. "And the chips." The clerk stared at the money, then at Bowen. You a cop?" "Something like that," Bowen said. He looked out the window. The black smoke rose higher, darker now against the sun. That fire down the road. How long's it been burning? The clerk blinked, struggling to switch gears. 20 minutes. Maybe 30. Heard a boom first. Like thunder, but sharper. Which way? County Road 9. Leads to the Lazy J Ranch. Bowen nodded. He picked up the beer. "Call the sheriff. Tell him he's got 2 packages waiting for pickup. Tell him to bring a mop." "Wait," the clerk stammered. "You ain't staying." Bowen turned to the door. "I got a fire to catch." He stepped back out into the furnace. The heat felt cleaner now, honest. He walked to the Suburban, popped a beer from the plastic ring, and took a long pull. The warm bitterness washed away the taste of the store. He looked at the Taurus. He looked at his Suburban. He climbed in, started the engine, and backed out onto the gravel. He didn't look at the store as he pulled onto the highway. He watched the smoke. It stood like a beacon, a black marker on a map that promised violence. Diesel and high-test rubber. A boom that sounded like thunder. Bowen gunned the engine. The heavy SUV surged forward, eating up the asphalt. The law could handle the petty thieves. He had business with the Black Pillar. It called to him, speaking a language of destruction he understood better than he cared to admit. The road stretched out, open and unforgiving, leading straight into the heart of the burn. Chapter 2. The county road was washboard gravel, a bone-rattling path that kicked up a beige rooster tail of dust behind the Suburban. Bowen drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting on the shifter, eyes scanning the fence line. The Lazy J wasn't a dusty relic of the Old West. It was a factory. The fence posts were galvanized steel, strung with high-tensile wire tight enough to sing in the wind. Solar panels glinted on the ridge, feeding power to automated pumps. This place sold organic beef to Whole Foods and steaks to steakhouses in Dallas where the waiters wore tuxedos. It smelled of money. Today it smelled of cordite and roast meat. Bowen slowed as he approached the main gate. The heavy iron archway, laser-cut with the Lazy J brand, stood intact. The gate itself, a massive electronic barrier, lay twisted on the ground, ripped off its hinges. Tire tracks, wide and deep, cut through the manicured dirt. He didn't drive in. He stopped the Suburban 50 yards out, killing the engine. The silence returned, heavier now. The column of smoke he'd seen from the highway originated from the main barn, a massive metal structure that now looked like a crushed soda can blackening in a fire pit. Bowen grabbed his rifle from the passenger seat, an M1A SOCOM 16, short, heavy, and loud. He racked the slide, checked the safety, and stepped out. The heat pressed down, but the air here carried a copper tang that sat in the back of the throat. He moved off the road, keeping to the scrub brush, boots silent on the hardpan. He wasn't law enforcement right now. He was a predator checking a trap that had already sprung. He cleared the first structure, a small guard shack near the gate. The glass was blown out. Inside, a man in a security uniform sat slumped in a chair, his head tipped back at an unnatural angle. A single hole in the center of his forehead. Clean. Professional. No struggle, no panic. Just lights out. Bowen moved on. The main compound opened up like a wound. The ranch house, a sprawling single-story limestone build, stood untouched, front door wide open. But the yard was a slaughterhouse. 3 bodies lay near the bunkhouse. Cowhands, probably. They didn't have weapons. They had been lined up and executed. Face down in the dirt, hands zip-tied. Bowen knelt by the nearest one. He touched the neck. Cold. This happened hours ago. He noted the brass casings, glittering in the dust. 5.56 millimeters. Military grade. He stood up, his jaw set. This wasn't a robbery. Robbers panic. Robbers shout and spray bullets. This was a liquidation. A crew had swept through here with the efficiency of a threshing machine. He swept the area with his scope. Movement near the irrigation tank, a massive round concrete reservoir on the north side of the compound. Bowen moved. He kept the burning barn between him and the tank, using the smoke for cover. The heat from the fire blistered the air, drying out his eyes. He ignored it. He moved low, fast, covering ground with the deceptive speed of a man who didn't like running but knew how to close a gap. He reached the concrete lip of the tank. He listened. A wet, ragged sound. Like a sucking chest wound trying to pull in air that wasn't there. Bowen rounded the curve of the tank. J.D. Miller, the owner of the Lazy J, lay propped up against the concrete wall. His shirt, once a crisp white button-down, was now a ruin of crimson. He clutched his abdomen, fingers slick and red. His Stetson lay in the dust a few feet away, trampled. Bowen slung the rifle and dropped to a knee. "J.D.," Bowen said. His voice was low, devoid of pity. Pity didn't help the dying. The man's eyes fluttered open. They were glassy, focused on a horizon Bowen couldn't see. He coughed, a spray of pink mist coating his chin. "Bowen?" J.D. whispered. The name came out as a bubble of blood. "I'm here." Bowen checked the wound. Gut shot. 3 of them. He was bleeding out, slowly and painfully. There was nothing to be done. A medevac chopper was an hour out, and J.D. had maybe 5 minutes. "They took him," J.D. wheezed. "Took everything." "Who?" "Red," J.D. gasped. His hand tightened on Bowen's forearm, leaving a smear of blood on the denim jacket. "Red Kilgore. Brought his crew. Security, my ass." Bowen knew the name. Kilgore. Ex-Blackwater, ex-lot of things. A man who treated war crimes like a resume builder. "Why J.D.?" Bowen asked. "Why hit a beef ranch?" J.D. tried to laugh, but it turned into a grimace. "Not cows, Bowen. Not just cows. The logistics hub. The trucks." Bowen looked past J.D., toward the massive equipment sheds that stood empty. The doors were open. The oil stains on the concrete were fresh. "The fleet," Bowen said. "High-speed, heavy haul," J.D. managed. "Refrigerated, armored. We were moving cash. Black budget, government contract. Supposed to be safe." "You were laundering transport," Bowen said. It wasn't a question. "Diversifying," J.D. corrected weakly. Kilgore, he knew. He was the escort. Turned on us. Killed everyone. Maria, the boys. Tears cut tracks through the dust on J.D.'s face. They're gone, J.D., Bowen said. He didn't lie. He didn't say they were in a better place. It was quick. Don't let him. Keep it. J.D. gripped Bowen's arm harder, nails digging in. Promise me. Burn it all. Bowen looked at the dying man. He looked at the carnage around them. The silence of the desert felt judgmental. I won't just burn it, Bowen said. I'll bury him in the ashes. J.D. nodded, a small jerky motion. The tension went out of his frame. His eyes fixed on the sky, the pupils blowing wide. He let out a long, rattling breath that didn't come back. Bowen sat there for a moment. He reached out and closed J.D.'s eyes. He stood up, wiping the blood from his hands onto his jeans. He turned his attention to the empty sheds. The tire tracks he'd seen at the gate matched the heavy dual-wheel imprints here. 5 trucks. Big rigs. Maybe Kenworths or Peterbilts. Heavy haulers, customized for secure transport. Kilgore hadn't just stolen a shipment, he'd stolen the means to move it. He had a mobile fortress now. Bowen walked over to the nearest shed. He found a clipboard hanging on a nail. The manifest. He flipped through the pages. Destinations unknown. Cargo, class of specie. Cash. Pallets of it. Enough to buy a small country or start a medium-sized war. He walked back to the burning barn. The heat pushed him back. He scanned the ground. He found it near where the trucks had been parked. A discarded satellite phone crushed under a heavy boot heel. Beside it, a half-empty bottle of cheap whiskey. Rotgut. Bowen picked up the bottle. He sniffed it. High proof, low quality. Kilgore's brand. The man had a taste for the gutter, even when he was stealing millions. Bowen looked at the tracks leading out of the compound. They headed south, toward the river. Toward the border. But heavy trucks couldn't cross just anywhere. They needed a bridge, or a hard-bottom low-water crossing. He checked his watch. 3:10 p.m. They had a 2-hour head start. In heavy trucks on back roads, that was 40 miles, maybe 50. Bowen walked back to the Suburban. The heat didn't bother him anymore. The cold knot in his stomach radiated enough chill to offset the sun. He climbed in, placing the rifle in the passenger seat. He keyed the ignition. The engine roared to life. He didn't call it in. The law would bring crime scene tape and questions. They would spend 3 days processing the scene while Kilgore vanished into Mexico or the dark corners of the Arizona desert. Bowen put the Suburban in gear. He spun the wheel, kicking up dust, as he turned the heavy vehicle around. He stopped at the gate, looking back one last time at the Lazy J. The smoke from the barn was beginning to thin, replaced by the carrion birds starting to circle. Reckoning's coming, Bowen muttered to the empty road. He hit the gas. The Suburban lunged forward, hunting the. Chapter 3. The tracks told a story written in pulverized rock and compressed dirt. 5 sets of duels, 18 wheels apiece, cutting a path through the scrub brush south of the Lazy J. They didn't weave. They didn't drift. They moved in a tight, predatory formation, the tread marks overlapping like scales on a snake. Bowen kept the Suburban at a steady 40, fighting the urge to floor it. Speed kills on a caliche road. The surface looks solid until it turns to powder, sending a heavy truck sliding sideways into a ravine. He needed to reach them, not join the wreckage. The air conditioning struggled against the afternoon sun. Dust fine as talc seeped through the door seals, coating the dashboard in a spectral gray layer. It tasted of ancient earth and dried bone. He read the road. The lead truck rode heavy. The sidewall impressions bulged deep into the soft shoulders on the turns. That was the gold. Or the cash. Whatever Class A specie amounted to in weight. The other 4 rode lighter, flankers guards the muscle. 3 miles south of the ranch, the road narrowed, squeezed between a limestone bluff and a dry arroyo. A barbed wire fence ran parallel to the ditch, the cedar posts bleached white by decades of UV exposure. Up ahead, a white pickup truck sat angled on the shoulder, hazard lights flashing a weak yellow against the glare. A man stood by the fence line, wrestling with a spool of wire. Bowen slowed. He checked the Glock on his hip, tapped the brakes, and rolled the window down. The heat punched him in the face. The man looked up. He was old, his face a topographical map of deep wrinkles and sunspots hidden under a straw hat that had seen better years. He wore heavy leather gloves and a shirt that had been blue once. Bowen pulled alongside. The Suburban idled, a low, menacing rumble. "Afternoon," Bowen said. The man didn't smile. He held a pair of fencing pliers like a weapon. He looked at Bowen's Suburban, then at Bowen. He spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dust. "You with them?" the man asked. His voice sounded like dry leaves scraping concrete. "No," Bowen said. "I'm the cleanup crew." The man lowered the pliers an inch. He gestured with his chin toward a section of fence 20 yards down. It lay flattened. The cedar posts snapped like matchsticks, the wire tangled in a mess of sagebrush. "They drive like they own the world," the man said. "Ran right over it. Didn't tap the brakes. Just plowed through. Lost 3 head of cattle through that gap already." "Big trucks?" "Huge. Black cabs. Unmarked trailers. Move fast. Too fast for this road." The man wiped sweat from his brow with a forearm. "Saw 'em about 40 minutes ago. Sounded like thunder rolling on the ground." "5 of them?" "5, the man confirmed. Lead truck had a bull bar on it, the size of a gate. Hit that post and laughed." Bowen looked at the broken fence. It took a lot of force to snap a cedar post that thick. It took arrogance to do it when you had plenty of road. "Did they stop?" Bowen asked. "Down at the fork," the man pointed south with the pliers. "Where the trail splits toward the old copper mine and the river. Saw brake lights. Sat there for 10 minutes. Then they took the river road." "Obliged," Bowen said. He reached into the center console, pulled out a $50 bill, and held it out the window. The man stared at it. "I don't need charity." "For the wire," Bowen said. "And the trouble." The man stepped forward, took the bill with 2 leather-clad fingers, and nodded once. A transaction between men who understood the cost of things. "Watch yourself," the man said. "Those boys, they had a look. Like wolves passing through a sheep pen." "I'm not a sheep," Bowen said. He rolled the window up and hit the gas. The fork in the road appeared 2 miles later. It was a desolate patch of flat ground, where the scrub gave way to hard-packed gravel. The tracks told him the story before he even stepped out. The convoy had formed a perimeter. Bowen parked the Suburban and got out. He walked the site, eyes on the ground. The tire marks showed the formation. The heavy truck stayed in the center. The 4 escort trucks fanned out, creating a defensive box. This wasn't a piss break. This was a tactical halt. A gear check. He walked to where the lead truck had idled. Oil dripped onto the gravel, fresh and dark. A leak. Maybe a seal blew when they rammed the fence. That was good. Machines break. Machines bleed. It gave him a trail to follow, even if the ground got hard. He circled the perimeter. He found footprints. Heavy tactical boots. Vibram soles. No cowboy boots here. These men wore gear designed for war zones, not rodeos. Near the edge of the clearing, by a cluster of mesquite, he found the trash. They had cleaned out their cabs. Fast food wrappers, generic bland packaging. Coffee cups. And a bottle. Bowen crouched. He picked it up with the tip of a pen he pulled from his pocket. It was the twin of the bottle at the ranch. Old Crow. Cheap, harsh, high-proof bourbon. Half empty. Kilgore. The man commanded a paramilitary unit capable of liquidating a ranch in minutes, yet he drank like a hobo living under a bridge. It spoke of a discipline that had rotted from the inside out. He needed the edge off to function. Bowen stood, scanning the brush. Something plastic caught the light near a jagged rock. He walked over. It was a phone. A burner. Cheap plastic, disposable. It had been smashed against the rock, the screen shattered, the casing cracked open. Bowen picked up the pieces. The battery lay a few feet away. The SIM card was missing. He turned the broken chassis over in his hand. Nokia. Indestructible, usually. Someone had taken a hammer or a pistol butt to this one. Why smash a burner? You toss a burner. You smash a phone that has something on it you don't want recovered, even from the trash. Or you smash it because you're angry. Because the call didn't go the way you wanted. He looked at the bottle. He looked at the phone. Kilgore got a call here. A change of plans. A check-in. And he didn't like the news. He drank half a bottle of poison and smashed the link to the outside world. Bowen pieced the timeline together. They hit the ranch. They ran. They stopped here to regroup. Kilgore gets a call. He gets pissed. They move out, taking the river road. It felt rigid. Professional, yes, but brittle. The formation was textbook, but the behavior, the drinking, the rage, was unstable. Bowen walked back to the center of the tire tracks. He crouched again, touching the oil spot. It was tacky, still warm. He looked south. The river road was a nightmare of washouts and blind curves. It led to the Rio Grande, but there were no bridges this far west. Just the low-water crossing at Devil's Ford. If they tried to cross the river with fully loaded rigs, they needed low water. It hadn't rained in weeks. The river would be down, but the mud would be waiting. He stood up, dusting his hands on his jeans. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of sage and something else. Ozone. He looked at the sky. Clear blue. No clouds. No storm. He looked back at the tracks. Something bothered him. The tread patterns. He walked the perimeter again, counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sets of heavy truck tires. But over there, on the outer edge of the hardpack, partially obscured by the departure tracks of the convoy, a 6th set. Bowen moved closer. He knelt, bringing his face inches from the ground. These weren't truck tires. They were aggressive, all-terrain tires. Wide. A heavy SUV or a modified truck. They didn't come in with the convoy. The tracks overlay the convoy's arrival tracks, but were cut by the departure tracks. Someone had joined them here. Or watched them. He followed the rogue tracks. They looped wide, staying in the blind spot of where the perimeter had been. They stopped behind a ridge of earth, then pulled away, following the convoy. A tail. Bowen felt a cold prickle on the back of his neck. Kilgore had a shadow. And it wasn't Bowen. He looked at the smashed phone again. Maybe Kilgore didn't break it because of a call. Maybe he broke it because he realized he was being hunted, and he wanted to go dark. But if he knew he was being hunted, he wouldn't have stopped for 10 minutes. He would have run. No. Kilgore didn't know about the shadow. The shadow was good. The shadow stayed off the main pad, used the terrain, kept its distance. Bowen stood, sliding the broken phone pieces into his pocket. The game just changed. It wasn't a pursuit anymore. It was a race. Someone else wanted that truck, or the money inside it. And if they were tracking a paramilitary heavy haul unit, they brought their own teeth. He walked back to the Suburban. He pulled the M1A from the passenger seat and placed it in the rack between the front seats, barrel up, ready to grab. He checked the magazine. 20 rounds of .308 hollow point. He climbed in. The engine caught with a roar. Bowen put the transmission in drive. He didn't take the center of the road this time. He hugged the edge, his eyes moving from the tracks to the horizon, scanning for the glint of glass or the dust of a second pursuer. The diesel trail led to the river. The oil trail led to the river. And now, a ghost trail led to the river. Crowded day in the desert, Bowen said to the dashboard. He pressed the accelerator. The Suburban surged, kicking up dust, hunting the monsters that had passed this way. Chapter 4. The road to the river didn't just deteriorate, it surrendered. The hard-packed caliche gave way to loose shale and sand that shifted under the Suburban's tires like granulated sugar. Bowen fought the wheel, the heavy SUV sliding in slow, controlled drifts around the switchbacks, dropping into the Rio Grande Valley. The temperature rose as the elevation dropped. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of wet clay and rotting vegetation. It was a stark change from the dry sear of the high desert. Here, things grew just to strangle other things. Cane reeds choked the banks, standing 10 feet tall, a green wall hiding the water. Bowen rounded a final, blind curve and hit the brakes. The abs stuttered, bringing the nose of the truck to a halt 10 feet from the drop-off. Below him lay Devil's Ford. It wasn't a bridge. It was a suggestion. A ridge of limestone bedrock that cut across the river bottom, offering a shallow path for those brave enough or desperate enough to try it. Today the river ran low, a sluggish brown muscle flexing between the banks. But the approach looked like a war zone. Bowen killed the engine. He needed to hear. He cracked the door and stepped out onto the running board, scanning the cane in the far bank. Silence. Just the drone of cicadas and the distant rhythmic lap of water against stone. He grabbed the M1A, slung it over his shoulder, and walked down the incline. The heat wrapped around him, humid and suffocating. The convoy had hit the ford with brute force. Bowen stood at the edge of the water, studying the violence etched into the mud. The heavy trucks, laden with steel and cash, had churned the entry point into a slurry. Deep gouges 2 feet down showed where differentials had dragged. He saw shattered limestone, white scars against the brown riverbed, where tires had spun and fought for traction. They hadn't finessed it. They had bullied their way across. He could almost hear the engines screaming, the smell of burning clutch plates lingering in the heavy air. He stepped onto the exposed rock of the crossing. The water washed over his boots, cool and swift. He walked to the middle of the river, the current tugging at his legs. Midstream, the destruction amplified. One of the trucks had slipped off the high line. He saw the slide marks, the desperate clawing of rubber against moss-slicked stone. They had used tow chains here. He found the evidence, deep scratches on the rock and a snapped link of high-test steel lying in a shallow pool, rusting already in the brackish water. Bowen picked up the chain link. It was heavy, cold. He tossed it into the deep water downstream. It vanished with a sullen plunk. They made it across, but it cost them time. And it cost them stealth. Anyone with eyes could see this crossing from a mile away. He looked at the far bank. The exit ramp was a disaster of torn earth and crushed cane. They had winch-hauled at least one vehicle up the slope. But Bowen wasn't looking at the main scar. He looked 10 yards upstream, where the cane grew thickest. A narrow game trail cut through the reeds. To a casual observer, it looked like a deer path. To Bowen, it looked like a tactical entry. He waded upstream, the water deepening to his waist. He held the rifle high. He pushed through the cane, the leaves slicing at his arms like paper cuts. He found the tracks in the soft loam of the bank. They were faint but distinct. The same all-terrain tread he'd seen at the regroup point. But here, the driver showed his skill. He hadn't followed the convoy into the mud pit. He had found a higher, harder line, threading the needle between two massive boulders that the big rigs couldn't hope to clear. Bowen crouched, ignoring the water soaking his jeans. He measured the wheelbase with his eyes. Short. Agile. A modified Jeep or a Land Cruiser. This driver didn't struggle. He flowed. He entered the water quiet, crossed on the spine of the rock, and exited without spinning a tire. Bowen traced the path up the bank. He found a broken reed, bent at knee height. He examined the break. Green. Fresh sap oozed from the fracture. This happened recently. The Chato wasn't hours behind Kilgore anymore. He was minutes behind. Bowen climbed the bank, his boots sucking in the mud. He reached the top and looked south. The trail opened up again, a straight shot of hard pack heading toward the canyonlands. He saw the dust hanging in the air, miles out. 2 distinct clouds. The big cloud, the convoy. The small, thin wisp behind it, the Chato. Bowen walked back to the Suburban. He checked the depth of the mud where the convoy had churned it up. Too deep. If he followed their line, he'd high-center the Chevy on the diffs. He'd be digging for hours. He looked at the Shadow's line. Tight. Technical. The Suburban was wider than the Shadow vehicle. Heavier. "Don't scratch the paint," he muttered. He climbed in. He shifted the transfer case into 4 low. He locked the rear differential. He eased the Suburban down the slope, avoiding the ruts. He put the driver's side tire on the high ridge of the mud, the passenger tire hooking the edge of the cane. The truck tilted, sliding precariously. Bowen feathered the throttle, letting the torque do the work. He hit the water. The current pushed against the doors. He kept the momentum steady, a slow crawl. The tires grabbed the limestone. He steered upstream, following the ghost line. The boulders loomed. He pulled the mirrors in. The gap was tight. He felt the stones scrape against the running boards, a long metal shriek that vibrated through the chassis. He held his breath. The truck groaned, twisted, and popped through. He lined up the exit. The Shadow had gone straight up. Bowen hit the gas. The V8 roared, the tires biting into the loam. The front end lifted, clawing for the sky. Mud sprayed the windshield. The rear end fishtailed, threatening to slide back into the river. Bowen corrected, steering into the slide, keeping the pedal down. The tires found a root system, grabbed, and launched the heavy SUV over the lip of the bank. He slammed back onto level ground, the suspension bottoming out with a bone-jarring thud. He didn't stop. He shifted back into 2 high, wiped the mud from the windshield with a blast of washer fluid, and accelerated. The road ahead was a washboard of pain, but Bowen ignored it. The game had clarity now. Kilgore was the bull, smashing through the china shop. The Shadow was the matador, waiting for the mistake. And Bowen? Bowen was the butcher, coming to clean up the mess. He watched the dust clouds on the horizon. They were merging. The gap was closing. The Shadow was making its move. He pressed the accelerator harder. The Suburban ate the distance, a black steel predator joining the hunt. The river lay behind him, a conquered barrier, but the real obstacle waited in the canyons ahead, where the shadows grew long and the echoes of a gunshot could travel for miles. Bowen didn't mind the dark. He just wanted to make sure he was the one pulling the trigger when the lights went out. Chapter 5. The badlands south of the river didn't look like Earth. They looked like the bottom of a dried-up ocean, where the water had evaporated in violence, leaving behind twisted hoodoos of red sandstone and canyons that cut deep enough to swallow the sun. Bowen drove the Suburban through a slot canyon, the rock walls rising sheer on either side, blocking out the GPS signal and the satellite radio. The V8 echoed against the stone, a low, throaty rumble that sounded too loud in the prehistoric silence. He hunted the Shadow. The convoy left a highway of destruction, broken sagebrush, crushed rocks, the heavy, arrogant tread of machines that didn't care who followed. But the Shadow vehicle, the Shadow had vanished. Bowen stopped the truck where the canyon opened up into a wide, scrub-choked basin. He killed the engine. The silence rushed back in, heavy and ringing. He stepped out, the heat wrapping around him like a wet wool blanket. He walked to the edge of the wash. He crouched, his eyes scanning the ground. Nothing. The hardpack showed the deep, distinct scars of the semi-trucks. But the agile, all-terrain tracks of the pursuer had evaporated. Bowen walked in a widening circle. He checked the soft sand near the mesquite bushes. He checked the gravel bars. The driver had gone off-road. Not just off-road, but off-trail. He had driven on the slick rock, the exposed spine of the earth where rubber left no impression. It took skill. It took patience. It took a knowledge of this terrain that bordered on the supernatural. Bowen climbed a nearby ridge, his boots finding purchase on the crumbling sandstone. He reached the crest and pulled his binoculars from the case. Zeiss Victory RF. German glass. Crisp, clear, unforgiving. He swept to the basin. Heat shimmered, distorted the air, making the distant mesas dance. He focused on the ridgeline 3 miles ahead. A glint. Fleeting. A flash of sun on metal, there and gone in a heartbeat. Bowen didn't blink. He held the focus. Movement. Not a truck. A figure. A man, standing on a rocky outcrop, silhouetted against the burning sky for a fraction of a second before dropping into the prone position. Bowen lowered the glass. He calculated the distance. 3 miles. The man watched the convoy. He had the high ground. He had the eyes. Bowen scrambled down the ridge. He didn't go back to the Suburban immediately. He moved toward a cluster of boulders near the canyon wall, a natural observation point for anyone tracking vehicles coming through the choke point. He found it. The sand behind the largest boulder looked undisturbed. Too undisturbed. The wind here blew constantly, creating small ripples, miniature dunes. But in a 3-foot circle behind the rock, the sand lay flat. Smooth. Someone had swept it. Bowen knelt. He touched the ground. He found a single impression near the rock face, a small indentation where a knee had rested. And something else. A smell. Not the cheap rotgut Kilgore drank. Not the acrid stink of unwashed men. Tobacco. But not cigarette smoke. This smelled sweet dark. Clove and raw tobacco leaf. Bowen dug his fingers into the sand where the knee print lingered. He sifted the grains. His fingertips brushed something hard. He pulled it out. A small carved piece of wood. Black ebony. Shaped like a skull, no bigger than a thumbnail. A bead. The kind woven into a bracelet or a rosary. Bowen held it up to the light. The carving looked intricate, grotesque. Santa Muerte. The saint of death. He knew that scent now. He knew the sweep of the sand. He knew the tactical discipline that cleared a position of all sign, leaving only ghosts behind. Chato, Bowen whispered. The name tasted like copper. El Chato. The flat-nosed one. A legend in the borderlands. He didn't work for the highest bidder. He worked for the family. The Sinaloa cartels used him when they didn't want a message sent. They used him when they wanted a problem erased. Chato didn't lead a crew of thugs. He led a pack of wolves. Los Fantasmas. The ghosts. Bowen stood up, his grip tightening on the small wooden skull. This wasn't a heist anymore. It wasn't a simple recovery of federal funds. Kilgore had stolen from the wrong people. The cash in those trucks didn't belong to the U.S. government alone. It belonged to the cartel, or the cartel had a claim on it. Or maybe Kilgore had burned them to get it. It didn't matter. Chato was here. And Chato didn't take prisoners. He didn't leave witnesses. Bowen looked back at the Suburban. It sat large and black and conspicuous in the sun. Against Kilgore's mercenaries, it served as a tank. Against Chato's ghosts, it served as a target. He walked back to the truck. He moved with more urgency now. The three-way game had just started, and he held the worst hand. Kilgore had the firepower. Chato had the stealth. Bowen had a badge he couldn't use, and a rifle he needed to clean. He opened the door and climbed in. He placed the wooden skull on the dashboard. It stared at him, hollow sockets judging his chances. He started the engine. He didn't gun it. He eased the truck into gear, keeping the RPMs low. He needed to move, but he needed to move quiet. He picked up the radio mic, then put it back. Radio silence. Chato would be monitoring the frequencies. The man hunted by listening to the electronic heartbeat of his prey. Bowen drove. He kept his eyes on the high ridges, ignoring the easy path of the convoy tracks. He watched for the birds. He watched for the unnatural stillness of the brush. He found another sign 2 miles later. A pile of stones, arranged in a cairn that looked natural to the untrained eye. But the lichen on the top stone faced down. Someone had moved it. A marker. Chato's scouts were leapfrogging. Marking the route. Coordinating the strike. They weren't attacking yet. They were hurting. They let Kilgore run, let him think he had escaped the river, let him get deep into the box canyons where the walls offered no exit and the cell service died. Bowen realized his position. He trailed the wolves who trailed the bear. When the wolves attacked, they would turn on anything that moved. He checked the M1A again. He checked the spare mags in the passenger seat. The sun began its descent, painting the canyon walls in shades of blood and bruised purple. The shadows lengthened, stretching out like fingers reaching for the truck. Bowen kept driving. He didn't turn back. You don't walk away when you see the devil's footprints. You rack the slide and keep walking until you find the man wearing the boots. Chapter 6. Night owned the desert. The sky turned the color of bruised iron, shedding no light, offering no stars. The canyon walls crowded the road, trapping the day's heat like a brick oven. Inside the Suburban, the temperature gauge needle kissed the red line. The heavy SUV had idled in the inferno, pushed through mud and climbed steep grades for hours. The radiator hissed a warning tune. Bowen needed water for the engine. He needed a moment to break the tunnel vision of the hunt. The map on the dashboard screen glowed dull green. A blue dot sat 2 miles ahead. A private agricultural pumping station. Bowen killed the headlights. He drove by the ambient glow of the dashboard and the pale reflection of the limestone walls. The V8 engine grumbled a low, deep note, rolling over the washboard ruts. The canyon widened into a bowl of pulverized rock. In the center sat the station. 3 massive corrugated steel tanks dwarfed a cinderblock pump house. A diesel generator hammered a relentless mechanical rhythm against the silence of the badlands. The smell of old diesel fuel and stagnant water hung heavy in the dead air. Bowen pulled the truck behind the largest tank, hiding the black chassis in the deep shadows. He left the engine running. The mechanical fan roared, fighting the heat block. He popped the hood release. He stepped out. The desert heat felt cool, compared to the blast furnace washing over his legs from the undercarriage. He left the M1A rifle in the rack. The pumphouse yard offered no long sightlines, just tight corners and blind spots. He drew the Glock 19, checking the chamber in the dark. A round sat ready. He holstered the pistol. His right hand dropped to his belt, fingers brushing the textured grip of the fixed-blade Ka-Bar knife strapped to his thigh. He grabbed a heavy plastic jug from the rear cargo area and walked toward the pump house. The generator noise swallowed the sound of his boots on the gravel. He moved edge to edge, clearing the first tank, scanning the perimeter. The steel structures held onto the day's heat, radiating warmth against his skin. A rusted spigot protruded from the side of the cinderblock building. Underneath it sat a concrete trough stained green with algae. Bowen set the jug down. He gripped the iron wheel of the valve. It resisted, locked by rust and time. He braced his boots against the concrete block and wrenched the wheel. Metal shrieked. A burst of brown water coughed from the pipe, followed by a steady, clear stream. He filled the jug. He splashed water over his face and the back of his neck. The chill offered a sharp, brutal clarity. A shadow detached itself from the roof of the pump house. Bowen caught the movement in his peripheral vision. A shape black against the black sky dropping toward him. He did not look up. He stepped off the center line. He let his knees bend, dropping his center of gravity. The man landed where Bowen had stood a fraction of a second before. Boots hit the dirt with a heavy thud. The man lunged, a length of steel wire stretched between 2 wooden handles sweeping toward Bowen's throat. A garrote. Bowen pivoted. He trapped the man's right arm against his chest, drawing the Ka-Bar in a single fluid motion. The steel whispered against the Kydex sheath. He drove the blade up, burying 6 inches of carbon steel under the man's ribcage, angling for the heart. The man grunted. A sound like a tire losing air. Bowen twisted the blade and yanked it free. Blood sprayed hot and wet, coating Bowen's forearm. The man collapsed, a puppet with severed strings. The generator thumped. The water ran into the trough. Phut. Phut. 2 suppressed gunshots cut through the mechanical noise. A bullet sparked against the iron spigot, inches from Bowen's face. Rock chips stung his cheek. Another round punched through the plastic water jug, exploding the container in a geyser of water and shredded polymer. Bowen dove behind the concrete trough. He hit the dirt, rolling, the Glock materializing in his right hand. Two men advanced from the shadows of the second water tank. They moved with absolute tactical precision, weapons up, covering intersecting angles. They wore dark tactical gear, faces painted with camouflage grease. Ghosts. Chato scouts. Bowen lined up the sights on the man to the left. He squeezed the trigger. The Glock barked, a deafening explosion in the confined space. The 9mm hollow point took the man in the center of mass. The impact spun him around. He hit the dirt, his suppressed pistol clattering against the gravel. The second man charged. He did not fire. He threw his empty pistol at Bowen's face and drew a massive curved machete from a back scabbard. Bowen deflected the thrown gun with his left forearm. He brought the Glock up. The slide locked back. Empty. He had forgotten to change the magazine after the liquor store. A fatal error. The man swung the machete, a horizontal arc aimed at Bowen's neck. Bowen dropped flat. The blade cleaved the air where his head had been, biting deep into the edge of the cinder block wall. Sparks showered over Bowen's back. Before the man could yank the blade free, Bowen kicked out, driving his steel-toed boot into the man's kneecap. Bone snapped. The man screamed, collapsing on his shattered leg. Bowen rose, driving the heavy steel frame of the empty Glock into the man's temple. The screaming stopped. The man hit the ground and lay still. Bowen stood in the dark, chest heaving. He tasted copper and dust. He kept the cawbar gripped tight in his left hand, the empty pistol in his right. He listened. The generator continued its rhythmic pulse. The water overflowed the trough. He moved toward the first attacker, the one with the garrote. He needed a weapon. A full magazine. A boot scraped gravel behind him. Bowen spun. The third man stepped from the open doorway of the pump house. He had been inside, waiting, watching the carnage. He was young. Late teens, maybe 20. High cheekbones, dark eyes burning with an arrogant fire. He held a sleek custom karambit in his right hand, the curved tiger claw blade catching the faint ambient light. "You killed my brothers," the boy said. His English carried a heavy sonora inflection. "They brought the wire," Bowen said. "I brought the knife." The boy lunged. He possessed the speed of a striking snake. He closed the distance in 2 steps, the karambit slashing a figure-8 pattern. Bowen dropped the empty Glock. He met the boy's charge. He parried a slash to his abdomen with his left forearm. The curved blade bit through the denim jacket, slicing skin and muscle. Pain flared white-hot. Bowen ignored the fire. He stepped inside the boy's guard. He drove his right elbow into the boy's face. Nose cartilage crushed under the impact. The boy staggered, but did not fall. He spun, slashing backward. The blade scored a red line across Bowen's ribs. They locked up. A brutal grapple in the mud, and blood beside the water trough. The boy possessed raw, explosive strength. He pinned Bowen's knife arm against his hip, straining to bring the karambit down into Bowen's neck. Bowen smelled the clove tobacco on the boy's breath. He saw the manic certainty in the dark eyes. Bowen shifted his weight. He stopped fighting the downward pressure of the boy's blade. Instead, he pulled the boy forward, using the kid's own momentum. He swept the boy's right leg with his boot. They crashed to the ground. Bowen landed on top. The boy thrashed, a wildcat trapped in a snare. He brought the karambit up in a desperate arc. Bowen caught the boy's wrist with his left hand. Blood made the grip slick. Muscles trembled. Bowen leaned his entire body weight onto the trapped arm, pinning it to the gravel. With his right hand, Bowen drove the cawbar through the boy's throat. The struggle ceased. The boy's eyes widened, staring past Bowen, locked on the empty sky. A gurgling breath bubbled through the wound. Then stillness. Bowen rolled off the body. He stayed on his knees, breathing the diesel fumes and the slaughterhouse stench. He looked at his left arm. The cut bled, a steady crimson flow soaking his sleeve. He unbuttoned the cuff, rolling the denim back. A deep slice, but it missed the artery. He pulled a bandana from his back pocket and tied it tight around the wound, using his teeth to pull the knot. He turned his attention to the young man. The boy wore expensive gear. Arc'teryx jacket, Solomon boots. High-end kit for a scout. Bowen grabbed the collar of the jacket and pulled it open to check for body armor. No armor. But something caught the meager light. A thick silver chain hung around the boy's neck. Attached to the chain rested a medallion. It spanned 3 inches, solid heavy silver. Bowen wiped the blood from the metal with his thumb. Santa Muerte, the saint of death. But this iteration carried a specific detail. The skeletal figure held a scythe studded with black diamonds, and a crown of thorns circled the skull. A royal crest. The mark of bloodline, not just allegiance. Bowen remembered the wooden bead in the sand. He remembered the legend of El Chato. The ghosts did not recruit outsiders. They were a family. He looked at the boy's face, tracing the high cheekbones, the prominent nose. A younger version of a face on a dozen Dia Most Wanted posters. Bowen closed his eyes. He had not just killed a cartel scout. He had killed the prince. He had killed Chato's son. The mission parameters disintegrated in the desert heat. This was no longer a chase for a stolen government shipment. It was a blood feud. When Chato found this station, he would burn the desert to ash looking for the man responsible. Bowen stood. He found the suppressed 9mm pistol in the dirt. He checked the magazine. Full. He racked the slide and shoved the weapon into his waistband. He walked back to the Suburban. The engine temperature gauge had dropped back to normal. The fan whirred a steady, calming note. He climbed into the driver's seat. He placed the silver medallion on the center console. The diamond-studded scythe glinted in the dash lights. He put the truck in gear and drove out of the basin, leaving the bodies for the vultures and the ghosts, heading deeper into the dark. Chapter 7. The price of poker just went up. Bowen spoke the words to the empty cab of the Suburban. He kept his eyes on the twin beams of the headlights cutting through the canyon dust. The silver Santa Muerte medallion sat in the cup holder, the black diamonds catching the dash lights, a silent witness to the escalation. The adrenaline began to recede, leaving behind a cold, hollow ache in his bones. His hands trembled on the steering wheel. He gripped the leather harder, forcing the muscles to obey. His left arm throbbed. The knife slice felt like a line of liquid fire drawn across his bicep. Every bump in the rutted road sent a fresh spike of agony up to his shoulder. He needed to stop. He needed to fix the arm, and he needed to fix his mind. The canyon walls narrowed, offering a deep recess carved out by centuries of flash floods. Bowen steered the heavy SUV into the limestone pocket. The rock overhang blocked the sky. He killed the headlights. He killed the engine. Total darkness crushed the truck. The silence followed, broken only by the ticking of the cooling exhaust pipes. Bowen reached up and switched on the dome light. The pale yellow glow illuminated the cab. He looked down at his left arm. The denim sleeve hung heavy, saturated with his own blood. It dripped a steady rhythm onto the floor mat. He unbuttoned the shirt, pulled his arm free and inspected the damage. The tiger claw karambit had laid the skin open to the fascia. The meat looked raw and angry. He leaned over and grabbed the olive drab trauma kit from the passenger floorboard. He unzipped it one-handed. He bypassed the bandages and went for the chemical solutions. He ripped open an iodine prep sponge with his teeth. He pressed the sponge directly into the open wound. The pain hit like a physical blow. A white-hot spike drove through his brain. Bowen clamped his jaw shut, grinding his molars together. He squeezed his eyes shut, breathing sharp, hissing breaths through his nose. He did not scream. He did not make a sound. The desert listened, and he refused to give it the satisfaction. He held the iodine in the cut for a count of 10. He pulled the sponge away. The blood flow slowed to a seep. He grabbed a tube of surgical cyanoacrylate, dermabond. He pinched the edges of the severed skin together with his right hand and ran a thick bead of the glue along the seam. The chemical reaction produced a brief, intense burning sensation, then hardened into a rigid shell. He wrapped the arm tight with gauze and secured it with a strip of duct tape torn from a roll in the kit. He flexed his fingers. The arm functioned. The pain sat reduced to a dull roar. He turned his attention to the passenger seat. The Glock 19 lay there, an inert piece of plastic and steel. It had failed him because he had failed it. He had entered a close-quarters fight with an empty chamber. A rookie mistake. An arrogant mistake. He picked up the weapon. He pressed the magazine release. The empty stick slid free. He locked the slide back, checked the chamber, and verified the breech lay empty. He pulled the trigger, releasing the striker. He placed his thumb and index finger on the slide lock lever, pulled down and pushed the slide forward, separating the upper receiver from the polymer frame. He removed the recoil spring assembly. He pulled the barrel free. The ritual began. He retrieved a small bottle of Hoppy's No. 9 solvent and a rag from the center console. The sharp, chemical scent of the cleaner overpowered the metallic smell of blood in the cab. He soaked a corner of the rag. He wiped down the slide rails, clearing the desert grit and the carbon fouling. He ran a bore snake through the barrel, pulling the brass bristles through the rifling until the steel shone like a mirror. He worked with methodical precision. The mechanical simplicity of the firearm grounded him. The weapon possessed no loyalties, no blood feuds, no ghosts. It operated on physics and chemistry. He applied a single drop of gun oil to the connector. He reassembled the weapon. Barrel into the slide. Recoil spring seated. Slide onto the frame rails. He pulled it back, letting it snap forward with a solid, satisfying clack. He retrieved a fresh 17-round magazine from his vest pocket. He slammed it home into the grip well. He racked the slide, stripping the top 9mm hollow point from the magazine and chambering it. He tapped the back of the slide with his palm, ensuring it sat completely in battery. The weight returned to his hand. The balance righted itself. He set the loaded Glock on his thigh. He picked up the silver medallion from the cup holder. He traced the crown of thorns on the silver skull with his thumb. Chato. The cartel enforcer held a mythical status south of the border. Law enforcement files painted a picture of a man who viewed murder as an art form. He did not issue warnings. He delivered severed heads in ice chests to rival plazas. He orchestrated ambushes that left 0 survivors. He commanded absolute loyalty from his unit, Los Fantasmas. And Bowen had just put a carbon steel blade through the throat of the man's heir. The tactical board reset itself in Bowen's mind. Kilgore and his mercenaries still possessed the trucks and the black budget cash. They remained the primary objective. But they had devolved into secondary threats. Kilgore operated for profit. He wanted to escape, spend the money, and live in the shadows. He would fight to protect the haul, but he would run if the odds shifted. Chato operated on blood. The cartel tracker would find the pump station. They would find the bodies of the scouts. They would find the dead prince. The moment that happened, the hunt for the cash would stop. The hunt for the killer would begin. Chato would mobilize every resource, every gun, every ghost at his disposal. He would seal the desert. He would not stop until he could look Bowen in the eyes and extract a pound of flesh. Bowen had wedged himself between a hammer and an anvil. He dropped the medallion back into the cup holder. He did not regret the kill. The boy brought a blade. He met the consequences. Out here, hesitation equaled death. He reached for the ignition. He turned the key. The V8 engine roared to life, shattering the silence of the limestone pocket. He hit the headlight switch. The twin beams illuminated the dust hanging in the air. He put the truck in gear and pulled out of the recess, rejoining the main canyon trail. The mission remained the same: find Kilgore, secure the cash, deliver the reckoning promised to J.D. Miller at the Lazy J, but the timeline had accelerated. Bowen needed to catch the convoy before the ghosts caught him. He drove for 20 minutes. The canyon walls began to slope downward, widening into a broad rocky plateau. The air felt different here. Stagnant. Bowen caught the scent first. Ethylene glycol. Antifreeze. Sweet and sharp. He crested a small rise and hit the brakes. Below him, sitting in the center of the road, sat a black Ford F-250. One of Kilgore's escort trucks. The hood stood wide open, angled toward the starless sky. A cloud of white steam billowed from the engine bay, glowing in the ambient light. Bowen killed his headlights and rolled to a stop 50 yards away. He grabbed the M1A rifle from the rack, chambered a .308 round, and stepped out into the night. He brought the rifle to his shoulder, scanning the truck through the ACOG optic. A man stood by the front grille. He held a flashlight in his teeth, aiming the beam down into the smoking engine. He held a wrench in his right hand, gesturing with it as he shouted at someone inside the cab. A breakdown. Kilgore's ruthless pace had broken a machine. Bowen lowered the rifle an inch. The rest of the convoy had abandoned the crippled truck. They left 2 men behind in the dark to fix it or die trying. Bowen stepped off the road, moving into the sagebrush. The price of blood required payment, and Bowen intended to collect the first installment. Chapter 8. Bowen knelt in the sagebrush. The M1A rifle stock pressed cold against his cheek. Through the ACOG glass, the world burned in high-contrast green. The F-250 hissed. White steam curled around the open hood, a geyser of boiled coolant painting the desert air. 2 men occupied the space around the engine bay. One held a heavy mag light. The beam cut through the steam, illuminating severed hoses and a cracked radiator housing. The second man stood guard. He gripped an AR-15. He swept the muzzle in erratic arcs. Fear guided his hands. "Give me the tape," the mechanic said. His voice cracked. "Tape will not fix a cracked block, Davis," the guard said. "We need to walk. Red left us. Red told us to fix it. We leave the truck. Red puts a bullet in my head. Hand me the damn tape." Bowen lowered the crosshairs to the mechanic's chest. The man wore a Kevlar plate carrier. Bowen shifted the aim point up. The throat. Unprotected flesh. A 3-pound trigger pull separated the man from his maker. Bowen inhaled. He prepped the brake. A sound stopped his finger. A sharp, digital chirp. Squelch BZZ. The noise did not originate from the mercenaries. It came from Bowen's own pocket. He reached down with his left hand. His fingertips brushed the hardened dermabond on his bicep. Pain flared. He ignored the fire. He retrieved the Motorola radio he took from the dead prince at the water station. The green LCD screen glowed against his palm. A frequency number pulsed. Squelch BZZ. Bowen killed the screen light. He pressed the speaker against his ear. No voices. Just the burst transmission. A locator ping. He heard an echo. Not from the speaker. The sound came from the ridgeline behind him. 50 yards out. Squelch BZZ. A second echo answered from the canyon floor, off to his right flank. Squelch BZZ. The ghosts communicated. They triangulated the signal. They hunted the stolen radio. They hunted the man who took it. Bowen looked at the mercenaries. They heard nothing over the hiss of the broken radiator. They argued over duct tape. Dead men wasting their final breaths. Bowen understood the geometry of the canyon. The ridges formed high, impassable walls. The ghosts occupied the high ground and the rear arc. They left one vector open. Straight ahead. Straight down the rutted road toward Kilgore's convoy. A shadow detached itself from the rocks above the F-250. Bowen watched the execution through the scope. The ghost wore night vision goggles. The 4-2 panoramic setup gave the killer a bug-eyed, demonic silhouette against the starless sky. The killer dropped a flashbang grenade into the bed of the pickup. The steel cylinder detonated. A blinding white flash erased the night. A concussive wave punched the air out of Bowen's lungs. The guard with the AR-15 screamed. He clutched his face, his vision burned to white ash. He pulled the trigger in a blind panic. 5.56mm rounds chewed into the dirt, the truck tires, the empty sky. Brass casings showered the gravel. The mechanic dropped his flashlight. He scrambled backward, his boots kicking up dust. The ghost moved. A suppressed submachine gun coughed. Fut fut fut. The guard collapsed. His rifle clattered against the chrome front bumper. The mechanic turned to run. A second ghost materialized from the brush on the far side of the road. The killer swung a heavy, telescopic steel baton. The metal crushed the mechanic's knee. The man hit the ground. Before he could draw breath to scream, a combat knife found the base of his skull. The spine severed. The body went limp. The slaughter took 4 seconds. Total silence returned, broken only by the hiss of the radiator and the electronic pulse of the radio in Bowen's hand. The ghosts stood over the bodies. They did not check pockets. They did not secure the dropped weapons. The bug-eyed killer turned his head. He looked straight at the sagebrush where Bowen knelt. The ghost raised his left hand. He pointed down the road. Forward. Squelch BZZ. The radio in Bowen's hand vibrated. A third ping answered from a cluster of boulders 10 yards to Bowen's left. They herded him. The cartel did not want a quick kill in the brush. A bullet in the dark lacked poetry. They wanted Bowen to hit Kilgore. They wanted the lone wolf and the mercenary army to bleed each other. The ghosts would wait in the dark and butcher the survivors. Bowen accepted the invitation. He lowered the M1A. He backed out of the sagebrush. He kept his eyes on the road, his boots finding solid rock. He put a limestone outcropping between himself and the dead men. He reached the Suburban. The V8 engine idled, a low mechanical growl. The heat from the exhaust washed over his shins. He climbed into the cab. He placed the captured Motorola radio on the dashboard, next to the silver Santa Muerte medallion. He shifted the transmission into drive. He kept the headlights off. He navigated by the pale, ambient light cutting through the canyon rim. The radio chirped. Bowen hit the accelerator. The heavy SUV chewed the gravel. He left the broken F-250 and the fresh corpses behind. The road twisted through the rock formations. The canyon walls squeezed tighter, turning the passage into a stone birth canal. The darkness grew absolute. The radio pinged again. The rhythm increased. The hunters matched his speed. They flanked him on the high ridges, unseen, pacing the black truck. They leapt from rock to rock, silent and relentless. Bowen gripped the steering wheel. The leather groaned under the pressure. The hunt required a change of tactics. Kilgore held the money. Chato held the terrain. Bowen held a badge he left in his glove box and a rifle he kept loaded. He drove deeper into the choke point. The canyon swallowed the truck. The road smoothed out, turning from loose gravel to hard-packed earth. A red glow appeared on the horizon. Taillights. The rear element of the convoy. The radio let out one final, long tone. Then dead silence. The ghosts stopped. They had driven their prey into the trap. The gates closed. The sandwich assembled itself. Bowen checked the action on the Glock resting on his thigh. He cracked his neck, the joints popping like dry twigs. The waiting ended. The bloodletting commenced. He pressed the gas pedal down, hunting the red lights in the dark. Chapter 9. Talk to me, Davis. Report. The voice bleeding from the Suburban scanner carried the ragged edge of a man losing control of his operation. Red Kilgore. The mercenary commander possessed a reputation for ice-cold precision in the sandbox of the Middle East, but the Texas desert demanded a different kind of toll. Bowen reached out and nudged the volume dial down a fraction. He kept his eyes locked on the two red pinpricks of light glowing a mile down the canyon floor. The convoy maintained a steady, grinding pace. "Davis is gone, Red," a second voice crackled over the frequency. "We found the F-250. Engine block cracked. Davis and the mechanic, they took a permanent dirt nap. Throats cut. Weapons gone." A heavy silence stretched across the airwaves. Bowen pictured Kilgore in the lead truck, his mind calculating the impossible math of the desert. The timeline collapsed. The predator became the prey. "Who hit them?" Kilgore demanded. "The marshal?" Bowen picked up the CB microphone. He pressed the transmit button, injecting his own voice into the mercenary network. "The marshal is right behind you, Red," Bowen said. "But I don't cut throats. I use a heavier caliber. You brought uninvited guests to the party." "Rhodes." Kilgore's voice dropped an octave, the panic replaced by a lethal, simmering rage. "You arrogant son of a bitch. You have no jurisdiction out here." "I have a badge and a rifle," Bowen said. "Out here, they mean the exact same thing. Pull the trucks over. Leave the cash in the cabs. Start walking north, and I might let you keep your kneecaps." "We possess 50 men and enough ordnance to level a city block," Kilgore fired back. "You drive an antique truck. You die in this canyon." "I brought friends," Bowen said. He released the transmit button and hung the microphone back on the dash. He let Kilgore chew on the paranoia. Let the mercenary wonder about the ghosts in the dark. Bowen tightened his grip on the steering wheel. The Suburban chewed the gravel, closing the distance to the taillights. The canyon walls rose like the sides of a rusted iron cauldron, trapping the residual heat of the day. The limestone faces offered no sympathy, reflecting the heavy V8 rumble back into the cab. He expected an ambush from Kilgore's rear guard. He prepared for the flash of muzzle fire from the scrub brush. He did not expect the hiss. The sound arrived before the impact. An electronic spitting whine, like a serpent striking through a high-voltage transformer. The unmistakable acoustic signature of a pneumatic stabilization system venting gas on a custom high-tech sniper platform. A weapon built in a European laboratory, carried by a ghost who hunted in absolute darkness. The impact hit a microsecond later. A massive kinetic shock punched the right front quarter panel of the Suburban. The heavy steel crumpled like tin foil. The windshield exploded inward in a concussive wave of pressure and sound. A spiderweb of tempered glass filled the air, reflecting the pale green dashboard lights before raining down on the leather seats and Bowen's shoulders. The engine block cracked with the sound of a detonating cast-iron bomb. Oil pressure dropped to zero. The tachometer needle buried itself. The V8 let out a dying, metallic shriek and seized solid. The front right tire blew out, shredding rubber and throwing the heavy SUV into a violent slide toward the canyon wall. Bowen fought the dead weight of the steering column. He stomped the brake pedal. The anti-lock system screamed. The Suburban slammed into the limestone face, grinding metal against rock in a shower of orange sparks. The truck came to a brutal, shuddering halt. Total silence returned, ringing in Bowen's ears. A plume of white steam and vaporized motor oil geysered from the shattered hood. The acrid stench of burned synthetic fluid and pulverized safety glass flooded the cab. Bowen did not freeze. He did not check for injuries. Survival demanded immediate, violent motion. The sniper possessed a bolt-action weapon. The electronic hiss meant a specialized thermal or active infrared optic. The shooter tracked his body heat through the shattered windshield. The second round would target the driver's seat. He unbuckled his seatbelt. He threw his body sideways, diving across the center console into the passenger footwell. The second round arrived. Hiss, crack. The .338 Lapua Magnum armor-piercing bullet punched through the driver's side door, shredded the headrest where Bowen's skull rested a second prior, and exited through the rear cargo glass. The sheer velocity of the round created a vacuum that sucked the remaining glass shards out into the night. Bowen kicked the passenger door open. He rolled out of the dying truck, hitting the dirt and scrambling on hands and knees to the front bumper. The engine block and the massive steel grille offered the only reliable cover against a military-grade rifle. He crouched in the dirt. He stripped the denim jacket off, tossing it aside. He reached into the Suburban's rear compartment and hauled his tactical vest over his chest. He snapped the buckles, securing the ceramic plates over his vital organs. He grabbed the M1A rifle, slung the canvas strap over his shoulder, and stuffed 4 spare 20-round magazines into his chest pouches. He needed water. He grabbed a plastic canteen from the floorboard and clipped it to his belt. Hiss, crack. The third round hit the engine block. Shrapnel pinged against the oil pan inches from Bowen's face. The sniper pinned him. The shooter possessed the high ground, the thermal advantage, and infinite patience. Bowen studied the terrain. The Suburban sat 50 yards from a dense cluster of fallen boulders at the base of the canyon wall. A scree slope of loose jagged rock led up into the absolute dark. He could not outrun a bullet. He could outsmart the optic. Thermal imaging reads the difference in temperature between a human body and the surrounding environment. At midnight, the desert air cools, turning a warm-blooded man into a glowing beacon on a thermal screen. But the canyon walls absorbed the sun for 14 hours. The rocks held the heat. They radiated it back into the night. Bowen dropped flat on his stomach. He pressed his palms against the dirt. He felt the baked warmth radiating from the earth. He crawled to the edge of the Suburban's front bumper. He looked at the boulder field. The massive stones glowed with residual thermal energy. He needed to become a rock. He grabbed a handful of the dirt beneath the truck. It sat soaked with fresh hot motor oil. He smeared the black greasy paste over his face, his neck, and the backs of his hands. The hot oil masked his surface temperature, blending his skin signature with the ambient heat of the crushed limestone. He gripped the M1A. He took a slow, deep breath, flooding his lungs with oxygen. He launched himself from behind the steel bumper. He sprinted. He abandoned the low crouch, relying entirely on explosive speed. His boots chewed the loose gravel. He kept his head down, his shoulders hunched, driving his legs like pistons. He expected the supersonic crack. He expected the impact to punch through his ceramic plates and end the hunt in the dirt. He hit the boulder field. He dove over the first massive rock, sliding on his chest into the narrow crevice between 2 granite slabs. No shot fired. He pressed his back against the stone. The rock felt like a radiator against his spine. He matched the thermal background. The sniper lost the target lock. Bowen looked back at the ruined Suburban. Steam continued to pour from the engine, creating a chaotic thermal bloom that further confused any infrared sensors. The black truck sat dead in the road, a 2-ton monument to the shifting balance of power. The ghosts operated with sovereign-level funding. Suppressed anti-materiel rifles. Thermal targeting computers. They intended to butcher Kilgore from a distance, pick the bones clean, and vanish with the black-budget cash. Bowen checked the action on the M1A. He wiped a streak of oily mud from his eye. He looked up the dark slope toward the source of the shot. "My turn," he whispered. He turned his back on the road. He began the agonizing, silent climb up the scree slope, leaving the machine behind, moving into the rocks on foot. The mechanic died, the vehicle died, but the man kept climbing. Chapter 10. The scree slope offered a masterclass in pain. Broken granite sliced at Bowen's palms. The loose shale shifted under his boots, threatening to send him sliding back down into the crosshairs of the thermal optic. He climbed on hands and knees, a creature of the dirt, hauling the heavy M1A rifle and the ceramic plates up the sheer incline. The motor oil on his face dried into a stiff, suffocating mask. Sweat cut pale tracks through the grease. He tasted salt and carbon. He breathed through his nose, short and shallow, hoarding his oxygen. He reached the canyon rim. The earth flattened out into a narrow limestone shelf. Bowen rolled onto his back, staring up at the starless sky. His chest heaved against the tactical vest. He let the burn in his thighs subside. He reached for his canteen, unscrewed the plastic cap, and took a measured swallow. The water tasted of plastic and iodine, but it cooled the fire in his throat. He flipped onto his stomach and low crawled to the edge of the shelf. The earth fell away. A box canyon dropped 200 feet straight down, a geological dead end carved by ancient water. Kilgore had built a fortress in the bowl. Bowen pulled the Zeiss binoculars from his chest rig. He pressed the eye cups against his face and adjusted the focal ring. The high-definition glass stripped the shadows away. 5 heavy transport trucks sat in a tight defensive circle on the canyon floor. The black cabs gleamed under the glare of portable halogen work lights. The trailers formed a steel wall, protecting the center of the camp. Kilgore's men felt safe. They felt victorious. The smell of burning mesquite wood and roasting meat drifted up the cliff face on a thermal updraft. The box canyon acted as a natural amphitheater, collecting the sounds of the camp and funneling them up to the rim. Bowen did not need a parabolic microphone. He heard them clear as church bells. "Tell the mechanic to stop whining and patch the airline," a voice echoed off the rock. Deep, resonant, carrying the cadence of absolute authority. Read Kilgore. Through the Zeiss glass, Bowen found the mercenary commander. Kilgore stood near a makeshift fire pit built inside a sawed-off oil drum. He wore desert tan combat pants and a black t-shirt. He held a bottle of Old Crow bourbon in his left hand and a thick Churchill cigar in his right. He looked relaxed. He looked like a man who just purchased the world and enjoyed the receipt. A younger man stepped into the firelight. He wore a plate carrier over a stained gray hoodie. He pointed a pair of grease-stained pliers at Kilgore. "Skunk says the compressor is shot red," the young man said. "He needs parts. We cannot drive the rig without air brakes. We hit a grade, that truck becomes a 50-ton missile. We sit here until sunrise." Kilgore took a pull from the bourbon bottle. "We drink. We eat the steaks we liberated from J.D. Miller's freezer. By morning, the heat will break. Skunk will figure out a bypass. He always does." "What about the Marshal?" Kilgore laughed. A harsh barking sound. He gestured toward the canyon entrance with the cigar. "Viper put a .338 Lapua through his engine block," Kilgore said. "I heard the radio chatter. The truck is dead. A man on foot in this desert lasts 12 hours before the sun boils his brain. The Marshal is a ghost. We own the board." Bowen shifted his weight on the limestone shelf. He indexed the magnification dial on the binoculars, pushing the glass to 12 power. He studied the perimeter. Kilgore possessed arrogance, but he understood war. He had positioned 2 M2 Browning .50 caliber machine guns on the roofs of the armored trailers. The heavy barrels pointed toward the canyon mouth. The kill zone looked impenetrable. A frontal assault meant suicide. But the men manning the guns lacked discipline. Bowen watched the gunner on the lead truck. The man sat on an ammunition can, a pair of night vision goggles pushed up on his forehead. He did not scan the dark. He stared down at the fire pit. He watched his friends grill thick cuts of Lazy J beef. He held a silver beer can in his hand, the aluminum catching the halogen glare. They celebrated a heist. They celebrated murder. "Hey, Jax," the gunner shouted down to the fire. "Toss a ribeye up here. I am starving." "Keep your eyes on the road, idiot," Kilgore snapped without turning around. "You eat when your shift ends." "Nobody is out there, Red," the gunner grumbled, taking a long drink from the beer. "We left the Marshal bleeding in the dirt. Davis and the mechanic caught a bad break, but the local talent ran off. We outgunned the entire county." "Do not mistake luck for invincibility," Kilgore said. He took another drink of the bourbon. "But tonight we celebrate. 80 million in untraceable bonds and specie. Enough to buy an island. Enough to disappear forever." A cheer went up from the men gathered around the fire. They clinked beer bottles. They slapped each other on the back. They possessed the chaotic energy of pirates dividing the spoils. Bowen lowered the binoculars. He let the glass rest against his chest. The acoustic perfection of the canyon delivered every arrogant word, every clink of glass, every hiss of roasting fat. They felt untouchable. They believed their superior firepower granted them immunity from the consequences of their actions. Bowen unslung the M1A rifle. He pulled the charging handle back, inspecting the brass casing of the chambered .308 round. He let the bolt slam forward. He could take the shot. He possessed the elevation. The distance measured 300 yards. A chip shot for the M1A. He could put a hollow point through Kilgore's skull before the mercenary took another drag of the cigar. He could end the commander and plunge the camp into chaos. He kept his finger off the trigger. He remembered the silver Santa Muerte medallion sitting in the cup holder of his ruined truck. He remembered the wood bead swept into the sand. Chato. The ghosts moved through the desert with the silence of falling snow. They possessed night vision, suppressed weapons, and a blood debt. They herded Kilgore into this box canyon for a reason. The towering walls offered no escape. The single entrance created a fatal bottleneck. Kilgore built a fortress, but he constructed it inside a tomb. Bowen pushed the rifle forward, resting the heavy barrel on a notch in the limestone rock. He settled the stock against his shoulder. He brought his right eye to the ACOG optic. He did not aim at Kilgore. He aimed at the deep shadows crowding the edge of the halogen light. He studied the brush. He watched the crevices in the rock face below. He searched for the unnatural stillness, the slight disruption of the natural pattern. "Come on, Chato," Bowen whispered, the words lost in the wind. "Show me the wolves." Down in the camp, a mercenary threw a handful of dry sagebrush onto the fire pit. The flames flared high, casting long, twisting shadows against the trailers. "I tell you," a mercenary near the fire said, his voice carrying the slur of too much whiskey. "I felt eyes on me back at the river. Like someone walking on my grave." "You drink too much, kid," Jack said, flipping a steak with a combat knife. "The only thing out there is scorpions and rocks." "I saw tracks," the kid insisted. "Skinny tires. Not the marshal's truck." "Shut up and eat," Kilgore commanded. Through the scope, Bowen saw the shift. A shadow separated from the canyon wall near the rear of the convoy. It moved without form, a fluid slide from darkness to darkness. A ghost. The cartel scout bypassed the halogen glare. He slipped beneath the rear axle of the trailing transport truck. He moved with absolute, terrifying purpose. He carried a block of C4 explosive in his left hand and a detonator in his right. Bowen watched the executioner plant the charge against the truck's air brake reservoir. Kilgore's men continued to laugh. The gunner on the roof crushed his empty beer can and tossed it into the dirt. He reached into a cooler for another. The wolves encircled the camp. Bowen tracked 3 more shapes moving through the perimeter. They carried suppressed rifles and machetes. They possessed the patience of predators watching blind sheep graze in a slaughterhouse. Bowen maintained his overwatch. He kept his breathing slow, matching the rhythm of the mountain. He possessed no desire to save Kilgore. He possessed no desire to warn the mercenaries. He came for the cash and the reckoning, and the cartel offered to do the heavy lifting. He pressed his cheek against the rifle stock. He watched the fuse burn down on the three-way war. He waited for the desert to explode. Chapter 11. "Hand me the half-inch socket before I crack your skull with this breaker bar." The voice drifted up the canyon wall, carrying a jagged edge of chemical panic. Bowen left the heavy M1A rifle on the limestone rim. Long guns lacked utility in close quarters. He checked the chamber of the Glock 19. He tapped the base plate of the spare magazine in his chest rig. He slid the Ka-bar knife an inch out of its Kydex sheath, confirming the draw. He descended the rock face. He abandoned the scree slope. He chose a vertical fissure in the granite, bracing his boots against the opposing walls. He climbed like a spider in the dark. Rough stone shredded his fingertips. Limestone dust coated his tongue. He ignored the burn in his thighs and the throb of his slashed bicep. The cartel ghosts encircled the camp. They planted explosives. They sighted their suppressed rifles. Bowen needed intelligence before the slaughter commenced. Kilgore planned to move the cash. If the cartel blew the trucks, the money burned. If the cartel hijacked the trucks, the money vanished south of the border. Bowen needed the destination. He needed the end point. He reached the canyon floor. He stepped from the stone crevice into the dense shadows of a mesquite thicket. The smell of the camp overpowered the natural desert scents. Roasting meat, spilled diesel, cheap bourbon, and stale sweat filled the stagnant air. 50 yards away, the men around the fire pit laughed. Someone threw an empty bottle. Glass shattered against a rock. Bowen ignored the fire. He tracked the desperate voice. He moved through the perimeter darkness, keeping the massive steel transport trailers between himself and the halogen work lights. He felt the residual heat radiating from the massive truck tires. He placed his boots heel to toe, silencing his approach. He found the mechanic at the rear of the second truck. The man knelt in the dirt, head shoved inside an open side compartment containing the air brake compressor. He held a grease-smeared flashlight in his mouth. He wrestled with a tangled mass of high-pressure hoses. Bowen studied the target. The mechanic weighed 140 pounds, soaking wet. His skin possessed a gray, translucent quality. Scabs dotted his forearms and the back of his neck. His hands shook with relentless tremors. Methamphetamine. The man operated on a fried nervous system and artificial energy. Kilgore's crew called him Skunk. Stupid valve, Skunk muttered, the flashlight bobbing between his teeth. Thread strip. Cannot hold pressure. Need a tap and die set. Red will skin me. Bowen crossed the distance. He did not rush. He closed the gap with deliberate, measured steps. He reached the rear of the truck. He stood 2 feet behind the kneeling mechanic. He clamped his left hand over Skunk's mouth and nose, driving the flashlight backward. At the same instant, he drove his right knee into the small of Skunk's back, destroying the man's center of gravity. Skunk thrashed. A wire-thin mass of kinetic energy and panic. Bowen hauled him backward, dragging him out of the work light's reach. Skunk's boots kicked the dirt. His fingernails clawed at Bowen's leather gloves. Bowen dragged the mechanic into a recessed alcove carved into the limestone wall. Total darkness consumed them. Bowen slammed Skunk against the rock face. He pinned the man's throat with his left forearm. He leaned his body weight into the hold, cutting off the air supply. Skunk's eyes bugged out. His hands slapped the limestone. Bowen brought his right hand up. He held a pair of heavy forged steel lineman's pliers. He tapped the cold metal against Skunk's cheekbone. I loosen my arm, you breathe, Bowen whispered, pressing his mouth near the mechanic's ear. You scream, I crush your windpipe. You understand the math. Skunk stared at the pliers. He bobbed his head. Bowen eased the pressure on the throat. Skunk sucked a ragged breath. The stench of chemical decay and unwashed flesh poured from his mouth. You the Marshal, Skunk wheezed. His pupils dilated, swallowing his irises. Viper said he killed you. Viper shot a piece of Detroit steel, Bowen said. He failed to check the meat. Let me see your left hand. What? Bowen grabbed Skunk's left wrist. He clamped the jaws of the lineman's pliers over the middle joint of the mechanic's index finger. He squeezed the handles. The steel teeth bit through the skin, finding the bone. Skunk gasped. His knees buckled. Bowen drove him back against the rock, holding him upright by the trapped finger. Kilgore has a schedule, Bowen said. His voice maintained a flat, conversational tone. He has a route. You hit the ranch. You took the trucks. You grabbed the cash. Where do you park them? I am just a mechanic, Skunk whined. Sweat beaded on his forehead. I fix the brakes. I change the oil. Red keeps the maps. Bowen squeezed the handles. Bone gritted against steel. A sickening pop echoed in the alcove. Skunk convulsed. A high, thin whine escaped his teeth. He tried to pull his hand away. Bowen held the arm rigid, locking the elbow joint. Pain is a chemical response, Bowen said. Your brain tells you the finger is dying. In a minute, I move the pliers to the next finger. We have 8 more stops before we discuss your thumbs. Give me the destination. He will kill me. Skunk sobbed, spittle flying from his lips. Red will cut my heart out. Red sits 50 yards away drinking bourbon, Bowen said. I occupy this space. I hold the tool. I dictate the future. The destination. I swear to God. Bowen adjusted his grip on the pliers. He moved the steel jaws to the ring finger. He clamped the metal down, breaking the skin. Wait. Skunk slumped. The false energy drained from his muscles. Defeat settled over his features. Base Bravo. Bowen eased the tension on the pliers. Define Base Bravo. Decommissioned airfield, Skunk whispered, his chest heaving. South of the border line. Sonora Desert. Kilgore bought it 3 years ago through a shell company. Poured concrete bunkers. Brought in anti-air radar. It operates as an off-the-books logistics hub for private military contractors. A fortress. A meat grinder, Skunk corrected. He has 30 men waiting there. Heavy weapons. An airstrip. A cargo plane touches down tomorrow at noon. They load the pallets of cash. The plane goes to the Caymans. Kilgore and the boys fly to a non-extradition country. What about J.D. Miller? Bowen asked. What about the Lazy J Ranch? Miller laundered the transport. Skunk closed his eyes, leaning his head against the cold rock. He held government contracts. Kilgore ran security. Kilgore realized the cargo possessed 0 tracking chips. Black budget slush fund money. Unmarked bills. Kilgore decided to cut the government out. Cut Miller out. Take the whole pie. A retirement plan, Bowen said. A massacre, Skunk said. We killed everyone. Women. Kids. The hands. Red ordered 0 witnesses. We burned the barns to hide the slaughter. Bowen looked at the trembling mechanic. He felt the rage stir, a cold current beneath the ice. He released Skunk's hand. He shoved the lineman's pliers into his back pocket. Skunk cradled his broken finger against his chest. You have the location. You let me go. I require a guarantee, Bowen said. He grabbed a handful of heavy plastic zip ties from his tactical vest. He spun Skunk around, pressing the man's face against the limestone. He grabbed both wrists, yanking them behind the mechanic's back. He threaded the thick plastic strips, pulling them tight with a sharp rasp. The plastic bit into Skunk's flesh, securing his arms. Sit down, Bowen ordered. He kicked Skunk's legs out from under him. The mechanic dropped to the dirt. Bowen ran another zip tie around Skunk's ankles, locking his boots together. He grabbed a greasy rag from Skunk's back pocket, shoved it into the mechanic's mouth, and secured it with a final strip of plastic around the head. Skunk let out a muffled groan, eyes wide with terror. You stay here, Bowen said. If you survive the night, the state troopers will find you tomorrow. Tell them the marshal said hello. Bowen left the alcove. He stepped back into the shadows of the mesquite thicket. He checked the time on his tactical watch. The glowing green numbers read midnight. He possessed the map. He possessed the endgame. Base Bravo. He looked toward the center of the camp. Kilgore tossed a fresh log onto the fire. Jax drank his beer. The gunner on the roof swept his heavy weapon across the empty canyon mouth, scanning the wrong direction. In the deep darkness behind the trailing truck, the cartel scout armed the C4 explosive. The red LED light blinked a countdown. 10 seconds. 9 seconds. Bowen drew the Glock 19. He chambered around. He did not retreat to the rim. He moved deeper into the parked convoy, finding the seam between 2 armored trailers. He braced his back against the cold steel. He slowed his breathing. The interrogation concluded. The information secured the future. The present required violence. He gripped the pistol, staring into the dark, waiting for the ghosts to light the fuse. Chapter 12. The C4 detonated. A concussive shockwave punched the air out of the canyon. The rear transport truck absorbed the blast. The explosive charge shredded the compressed air reservoir. Steel shrapnel ripped through the heavy trailer tires. A cloud of pulverized limestone and pulverized rubber erupted into the night sky. The blast wave hit the campfire. A geyser of sparks and burning mesquite logs showered the mercenary camp. Contact rear. Jack screamed, dropping his half-eaten steak into the dirt. He brought his M4 rifle to his shoulder, sweeping the muzzle across the dark tree line. Hold your fire, Red Kilgore bellowed. He stood tall in the center of the chaos, unaffected by the blast. He tossed the Old Crow bourbon bottle aside. He drew a custom 1911 pistol from a thigh holster. Identify targets before you shoot. The mercenaries ignored the command. Panic overrides discipline. The gunner on the roof of the lead truck gripped the spade handles of the M2 Browning. He depressed the butterfly trigger. The .50 caliber machine gun roared to life, spitting a 3-foot tongue of orange flame. Heavy armor-piercing rounds chewed into the canyon walls, shattering ancient rock, aiming at phantoms. The deafening chatter of the heavy weapon triggered the rest of the crew. 10 men opened fire with assault rifles, pouring a river of lead into the absolute dark. Bowen moved beneath the second truck. The heavy diesel engine above him idled, masking the sound of his boots on the gravel. He ignored the storm of gunfire. He ignored the brass casings raining down on the dirt. He required a bottleneck. The rear truck sat crippled, its air brakes locked solid. Bowen needed to kill the lead truck. He slid out from under the second trailer and sprinted the 10-yard gap to the front vehicle. He dove under the massive chrome bumper of the lead Kenworth. The engine block radiated heat like an open oven door. He drew the crowbar knife. He reached up into the undercarriage, his hands searching the dark geometry of the engine bay. His leather glove brushed the primary fuel line. Braided steel wrapped a thick rubber core. He hooked the serrated edge of the carbon steel blade behind the line. He gripped the handle with both hands, braced his boots against the steering axle, and pulled with his entire body weight. The braided steel fought the blade. Metal ground against metal. Bowen twisted his wrists, sawing the edge. The rubber core gave way. Diesel fuel exploded from the severed line. A high-pressure stream soaked Bowen's chest rig, filling the space beneath the truck with the sharp chemical stench of raw hydrocarbons. He rolled sideways, escaping the downpour. He emerged from beneath the front left wheel. The mercenary gunner continued to lay down, suppressing fire from the roof, deafening the immediate area. Down by the scattered fire pit, Kilgore grabbed Jax by the plate carrier. They intend to pin us. Kilgore roared over the gunfire. They disabled the rear guard. We push forward. Get the drivers in the cabs. Roll the rigs. We smash through. What about Skunk? Jax yelled back. Leave him. Move the fleet. The drivers scrambled up the side steps of the armored cabs. Doors slammed. Bowen reached into his tactical vest. His fingers closed around the cold steel cylinder of a Model 7290 flashbang grenade. He pulled the cotter pin. He held the spoon down. Kilgore turned toward the lead truck. He waved his arm in a tight circle, signaling the advance. Bowen lobbed the steel cylinder in a high arc over the hood of the Kenworth. The grenade dropped straight into the smoldering remains of the oil drum fire pit. The spoon flew off. The fuse burned for 1.5 seconds. The flashbang detonated inside the steel drum. The confined space amplified the explosion. A blinding sphere of magnesium fire consumed the center of the camp, accompanied by a sound like the sky cracking open. The remaining mercenaries dropped their rifles. They clutched their ears, their vision burned to a uniform white static. The drivers inside the cabs reacted to the blast. Fear crushed their training. They dumped the clutches. They slammed the accelerators to the floorboards. The stampede began. The massive diesel engines revved to the red line. The air horns blasted a chaotic, overlapping symphony of mechanical rage. 50-ton behemoths lunged forward, their dual tires spinning in the dirt, fighting for traction. The lead truck lurched 10 feet. The driver grabbed the next gear, expecting the torque to carry the armored trailer out of the canyon. The engine starved. The severed fuel line sucked dead air. The Kenworth shuddered. The massive diesel block coughed, sputtered, and died. The truck coasted to a halt, a dead weight blocking the narrow exit path. The second truck driver possessed no visibility. The flashbang had ruined his night sight. He operated on primal instinct, flooring the gas pedal to escape the kill zone. The second truck slammed into the rear of the dead lead trailer. The impact sounded like a train derailment. Twisting steel screamed. The fiberglass hood of the second cab shattered into 1,000 jagged spears. The armored trailer buckled, lifting the rear axles of the lead truck off the ground. The grinding collision echoed off the limestone walls, burying the sound of the gunfire. The third truck swerved to avoid the wreckage. The driver spun the heavy steering wheel, sending the rig off the hardpack. The massive tires sank into the soft sand on the canyon edge. The trailer jackknifed, the heavy metal box swinging sideways, sealing the gap. A steel wall. A massive, tangled barricade of broken machinery. Kilgore's escape plan died in a symphony of crushed metal. The commander stood trapped between the rock walls, the burning rear truck, and the 50-ton pileup blocking his path forward. Dismount. Kilgore screamed, his voice cracking with pure unrestrained rage. Dismount, and form a perimeter around the wreckage. The ghost struck. The cartel waited for the chaos to peak. They waited for the machines to die. Now they hunted the meat. Suppressed submachine guns coughed from the dark ridges above. Green laser sights sliced through the diesel smoke and the limestone dust, finding targets. A mercenary running for the wrecked trailers took a 3-round burst to the throat. He collapsed into the dirt, his blood mixing with the spilled diesel fuel. Jax dove behind the oil drum, returning fire into the dark, screaming obscenities at the unseen enemy. The gunner on the roof of the dead lead truck swung his .50 caliber weapon around, searching for the source of the green lasers. A ghost sniper on the western ridge put a .308 round through the gunner's optic nerve. The man slumped over the heavy machine gun, dead before his finger left the trigger. Bowen moved. He possessed no loyalty to either side. He sought the cash. He sought the end of Red Kilgore. He stayed low, using the chaotic shadows created by the flickering halogen lights and the burning brush. The air tasted of magnesium, pulverized rock, and atomized blood. He navigated the maze of crushed fiberglass and twisted steel between the first and second trucks. The space felt like the inside of a massive dying beast. Radiators hissed. Transmission fluid leaked in slick pools across the gravel. A mercenary scrambled out of the passenger side of the second cab. He dropped to the ground, an AR-15 clutched to his chest. He spun around, his eyes wide and unblinking in the ambient light. He leveled the rifle at Bowen. Bowen did not break stride. He brought the Glock 19 up in a single fluid motion. He fired twice. Center mass. The hollow point rounds punched through the man's plate carrier. The kinetic force threw the mercenary back against the massive truck tire. He slid down the rubber sidewall, leaving a crimson smear in the dust. Bowen stepped over the body. He reached the gap between the cab and the armored trailer. He found the lock on the trailer's side door. A heavy hardened steel padlock secured a massive deadbolt. Kilgore protected the black budget cache behind half an inch of armored plate. Gunfire raged in the open canyon. The three-way war consumed the night. Kilgore's men fought a desperate blind battle against an enemy they could not see. The cartel ghosts picked them apart with surgical precision. Bowen checked the spare magazines in his chest rig. The stampede succeeded. The convoy lay dead. The heavy lifting concluded. Now the bloody close-quarters work required his full attention. He gripped the cob bar in his left hand and the Glock in his right, ready to breach the vault. Chapter 13. A mechanical shriek pierced the relentless chatter of the assault rifles. The sound originated from the eastern ridge, a high-pitched whine tearing through the black sky. It carried the acoustic signature of a shoulder-fired rocket. Bowen pressed his spine against the armored trailer. He dropped his chin to his chest. He opened his mouth, equalizing the pressure in his eardrums. The warhead impacted the limestone cliff face 30 feet above the wrecked Kenworth. The weapon delivered a two-stage payload. The primary charge detonated, dispersing a massive cloud of volatile aerosol fuel. The mist coated the canyon wall and drifted over the crashed trucks. A fraction of a second later, the secondary detonator ignited the cloud. The thermobaric explosion ripped the oxygen from the canyon. A shockwave of pure overpressure slammed into the valley floor. The kinetic punch hit Bowen like a solid wall of iron. The force threw him away from the trailer, slamming him face first into the gravel. Blood vessels burst inside his nasal cavity. Hot copper flooded the back of his throat. The explosion incinerated the available air. A localized vacuum formed, followed by a thunderous implosion as the atmosphere rushed back to fill the void. The world went silent for 3 seconds. A high-frequency ringing consumed Bowen's hearing. He pushed himself up on his hands and knees. He tasted limestone dust and his own blood. The magnesium glare of the flashbang had faded, replaced by the chaotic, flickering light of a dozen secondary fires. Burning diesel fuel cast twisted, demonic shadows against the canyon walls. His hearing returned in a rush of agonizing noise. The desert exploded into a neon nightmare. Tracer rounds stitched deadly geometry across the dark. Kilgore's mercenaries fired NATO-standard red tracers. The cartel ghosts answered with piercing green lines of Russian surplus lead. The overlapping arcs of fire turned the box canyon into a strobe-lit slaughterhouse. Bowen wiped the blood from his upper lip with the back of his leather glove. He checked the action on the Glock 19. Dust coated the slide, but the weapon sat ready in battery. He operated on the bleeding edge of the chaos. The center of the canyon belonged to the dead and the dying. Kilgore's men formed a desperate circle around the crumpled remains of the first 2 transport trucks. The cartel ghosts descended the scree slopes like fluid shadows, using the smoke and the rock formations for cover. Bowen stalked the perimeter. He needed a vehicle. The black budget cash sat locked inside the trailers, but moving $80 million required horsepower. The stampede had murdered Kilgore's fleet. A mercenary stumbled out of the smoke 10 feet from Bowen's position. The man lacked his helmet. A green laser dot danced across his chest plate. "Jax!" the mercenary screamed, firing his AR-15 blind into the darkness. They flanked the perimeter. The ridge is compromised. A suppressed weapon coughed from a cluster of boulders above the man. 3 9mm rounds found the mercenary's unprotected neck. The man dropped his rifle, clutching his throat. Arterial spray painted the side of the armored trailer. He fell back into the dirt, kicking his boots in a final, frantic rhythm. Bowen tracked the origin of the suppressed fire. He spotted the cartel shooter crouched between 2 granite slabs. The ghost wore night vision goggles, adjusting his aim to target Kilgore. Bowen brought the Glock up. He aligned the tritium night sights. He squeezed the trigger. The hollow point round shattered the ghost's night vision optic and punched through his frontal lobe. The cartel shooter tumbled over the edge of the boulder, crashing into a patch of burning sagebrush. Bowen maintained the balance. If the ghosts slaughtered Kilgore's crew too fast, the cartel would focus their entire arsenal on the lone marshal. Bowen needed the 2 factions to grind each other into dust. He played the role of the equalizer, feeding the meat grinder. "Consolidate." Red Kilgore's voice boomed over the gunfire. The mercenary commander stood atop the hood of the 3rd truck, exposing himself to the crossfire. He fired his custom 1911 pistol with rhythmic precision. "Form a wedge. Secure the cargo doors. Nobody touches the vault." A cartel technical breached the canyon mouth. A stripped-down Toyota Helix rolled through the smoke, its headlights dead. A heavy DSHK machine gun sat mounted in the truck bed. The weapon spat thumb-sized rounds into the mercenary perimeter. The heavy impacts tore through engine blocks and shattered Kevlar plates. Bowen watched the Toyota advance. He found his transport. He holstered the Glock and drew the M1A rifle from his shoulder sling. The heavy .308 caliber possessed the stopping power to crack engine blocks and pierce light armor. He ran. He abandoned the cover of the trailers, sprinting through the open crossfire. He kept his body low, weaving between burning mesquite bushes and shattered rock. Red and green tracers snapped past his ears, cracking the air like bullwhips. He reached a limestone pillar near the canyon entrance. He braced the rifle against the stone, securing a stable shooting platform. The Toyota Helix crawled forward. The gunner in the bed maintained a relentless barrage on Kilgore's position. The driver navigated the wreckage with absolute focus. Bowen targeted the driver first. He placed the ACOG reticle over the man's silhouette behind the steering wheel. He exhaled a half-breath, pausing his respiratory cycle. He pressed the trigger. The M1A roared. The heavy recoil pushed against Bowen's shoulder. The armor-piercing round shattered the Toyota's windshield and destroyed the driver's chest cavity. The dead man's foot slammed onto the accelerator. The Helix lurched, engine screaming, and slammed nose first into a limestone boulder. The impact launched the gunner out of the truck bed. The man flew through the air, landing hard on the gravel, separated from his heavy weapon. Bowen slung the rifle. He drew the crowbar knife and broke from cover. He crossed the 20 yards to the crashed Toyota. The engine idled, a steady rumble despite the crushed radiator. The cartel gunner groaned, struggling to reach a pistol strapped to his thigh. Bowen stepped on the man's wrist. Bone snapped under the steel-toed boot. The gunner screamed, a ragged sound lost in the overarching roar of the firefight. Bowen knelt, bringing the crowbar to the man's throat. He recognized the face. A hardened cartel sicario, skin inked with prison tattoos. "You brought a truck to a gunfight," Bowen said, his voice a low rasp. "I appreciate the delivery." The sicario spat a mouthful of blood at Bowen's boots. "Chato will mount your head on a spike, gringo. You possess zero chance. The ghosts own this desert." "I own the keys," Bowen said. He drove the pommel of the crowbar into the man's temple. The sicario's eyes rolled back. Unconsciousness claimed him. Bowen stood. He opened the driver's side door of the Helix and dragged the dead driver out, dropping the corpse into the dirt. He climbed into the cab. Blood slicked the steering wheel. The scent of copper and cheap tobacco filled the interior. He checked the gauges. The fuel tank held a half-load. The engine temperature sat normal. A burst of 5.56 millimeters fire shattered the passenger side window. Glass fragments showered Bowen's lap. He ducked below the dashboard. He grabbed the M1A, resting the barrel on the window ledge. He searched for the shooter. A mercenary advanced through the smoke, his rifle raised. The man wore a shredded plate carrier and limped heavily on his right leg. He recognized the cartel truck, treating it as a hostile target. "Get out of the vehicle," the mercenary screamed, his voice raw with panic. Bowen leveled the M1A. "I prefer the air conditioning," Bowen said. He squeezed the trigger. The .308 round took the mercenary in the center of mass, dropping him instantly. The three-way war raged outside the cab. The canyon floor resembled the surface of a dying star, pockmarked with craters, littered with the dead, and illuminated by the relentless flash of muzzle fire. Kilgore fought to protect his stolen fortune. Chato fought to extract his blood debt. Bowen engaged the transmission. He threw the Helix into reverse, pulling the truck away from the boulder. The engine protested, but the four-wheel drive system bit into the gravel. He possessed wheels. He possessed firepower. He shifted the gear selector into drive, turned the steering wheel, and steered the stolen technical back into the heart of the storm. Chapter 14. Bowen steered the stolen Toyota Helix through the gauntlet of burning steel. The heavy tires crushed empty brass casings into the limestone dust, popping like firecrackers under the chassis. He kept the accelerator pinned to the floorboard. The four-cylinder engine screamed a high, metallic note of pure abuse. Tracer rounds snapped past the shattered windows. Kilgore's mercenaries fired red lines of light. The cartel ghosts answered with green. Bowen ignored the light show. He focused on the gap between the rock walls, hunting the open desert beyond the canyon mouth. A heavy bullet punched the passenger side door. The impact spalled interior metal, showering Bowen's right leg with hot shrapnel. The denim jeans absorbed the worst of the spray, but the sting felt like a swarm of angry wasps. He gripped the steering wheel harder. He cleared the final pileup of wrecked transport trailers. The canyon walls began to slope downward, widening into the dark expanse of the Sonora Flats. A VHF radio mounted beneath the Helix dashboard cracked with static. A voice broke through the interference. "Fantasmas. El Lobo stole Unit 4. Close the gate." The voice carried the absolute calm of a man who orchestrated murder for a living. Chato. Bowen reached down and unhooked the microphone from its plastic cradle. He pressed the transmit button with his thumb. "Unit 4 needs an alignment," Bowen said. "Pulls hard to the left. You should check the tire pressure before you lend these things out." A 3-second pause stretched across the frequency. "Marshal Rhodes," Chato said. The cartel enforcer rolled the R with deliberate precision. "You possess a talent for survival. You lack a talent for geography. You drive into a graveyard." "I bring my own shovel," Bowen said. He dropped the microphone onto the floorboard. The radio went dead. The canyon mouth opened wide. 2 massive limestone pillars flanked the exit road, forming a natural archway. Bowen saw the disturbed earth, a fraction of a second before the front wheels hit the pressure plate. The dirt looked soft. It lacked the hard-packed crust of the surrounding terrain. He braced his forearms against the steering wheel and clenched his jaw. The IED detonated. The cartel buried an artillery shell under the gravel. The command wire triggered a geyser of white-hot fire and pulverized rock. The blast wave hit the front axle with the force of a runaway freight train. The explosion sheared the heavy steel differential in half. The Toyota Helix lifted off the ground. A 2-ton piece of machinery launched into the air like a discarded toy. Weightlessness claimed Bowen for a single, chaotic heartbeat. The truck slammed back to earth. The nose dug into the dirt, catapulting the rear end over the cab. The Helix rolled. Roof to passenger side to undercarriage. A cacophony of shattering glass, buckling roof pillars, and screaming metal consumed the cab. The steering column punched Bowen in the ribs. The ceramic plate in his tactical vest absorbed the lethal blow, but the kinetic transfer cracked bone. Air rushed from his lungs in a ragged gasp. The truck slid 30 yards on its roof, grinding a deep trench into the desert floor before slamming against a granite boulder and coming to a dead stop. Silence rushed back, broken only by the hiss of escaping steam and the ticking of the dying engine. Bowen hung suspended upside down by his seatbelt. Blood dripped from his forehead, running past his nose and stinging his eyes. He tasted battery acid and crushed limestone. He released the buckle. Gravity dropped him hard against the crushed roof. He grunted, clutching his ribs. He kicked the warped driver's side door. The latch held. He drew his boots back and delivered a brutal, piston-like kick to the shattered window frame. The metal groaned. The gap widened. Bowen slithered through the opening, dragging his tactical vest and the heavy M1A rifle behind him. He stood up in the cool desert air. He wiped the blood from his eyes with his leather glove. The Toyota Helix resembled a crushed beer can. The front suspension lay 50 feet down the road. The engine block sat pushed back into the firewall. A pool of dark oil spread beneath the shattered hood, soaking the thirsty earth. He looked back toward the canyon. Flashlights cut through the smoke on the high ridges. The ghosts mobilized. They heard the blast. They came to verify the kill. Bowen turned his attention to the bed of the ruined truck. The heavy DSHK machine gun remained bolted to its steel pedestal. The roll bar had protected the weapon from the worst of the impact. The gun held a full belt of thumb-sized armor-piercing ammunition. A prize for the cartel. A weapon they would unbolt, mount on a fresh truck, and use to cut Kilgore's surviving men in half. "You ran a good race," Bowen said, patting the twisted quarter panel. "Time to put you down." He climbed onto the overturned chassis. He reached the heavy machine gun. He lacked the wrenches to unbolt the weapon. He lacked the time to dismantle the firing mechanism. He needed a permanent solution. He dropped back into the dirt and searched the debris scattered from the cab. He found a plastic jerry can, a red container holding 5 gallons of spare gasoline. The impact had cracked the nozzle, but the thick plastic body held the fuel. He picked up the can. He climbed back onto the truck bed. He poured the raw gasoline over the DSHK receiver. He soaked the ammunition belt. He emptied the remaining fuel through the shattered rear window, soaking the cloth seats and the dashboard wiring. The sharp fumes burned his nostrils, masking the smell of his own blood. He climbed down. He retrieved his M1A rifle. He checked the action, ensuring the bolt ran clean. He verified the location of his Glock 19 and the Ka-Bar knife. He unclipped his plastic canteen, shook it, and judged the weight. Half full. A meager supply for the Sonora Desert. He pulled a road flare from the tactical pouches on his chest rig. He popped the plastic cap and struck the ignition pad. The flare hissed to life, spitting a brilliant crimson flame. The red light painted the desert rock, casting long dancing shadows. Bowen tossed the flare through the broken window of the cab. The fumes ignited with a concussive whump. A pillar of orange fire erupted from the truck, illuminating the canyon mouth. The intense heat forced Bowen to take 3 steps back. The flames licked the night sky, consuming the fabric, the plastic, and the gasoline-soaked machine gun. Ammunition cooked off. The heavy DSHK rounds detonated in the fire, popping like erratic drumbeats. The brass casings became lethal shrapnel, pinging off the boulders. The cartel scouts on the ridge would see the beacon. They would find a funeral pyre instead of a weapon. Bowen turned his back on the burning wreck. He faced the open desert. Miles of empty, hostile terrain stretched between his position and Kilgore's private fortress at Base Bravo. No vehicle. No radio. Cracked ribs and a bleeding head. He adjusted the rifle sling, letting the heavy weapon rest across his chest. The pain in his side pulsed a steady, demanding rhythm. He ignored the pain. The anger provided better fuel. He struck out into the absolute dark. He set a deliberate, ground-eating pace. The glow of his burning wreck faded behind him, leaving him with the cold stars and the promise of a reckoning at the end of the road. Chapter 15. Spit requires moisture. Bowen spoke the words aloud to the empty expanse of rock. He tested the theory. He produced a dry, useless rasp. The Sonora Desert in the hours before dawn held a deceptive chill, but the earth radiated the stored violence of yesterday's sun. The sky faded from bruised purple to a pale bone-white gray along the eastern horizon. The stars surrendered their light, preparing for the incoming furnace. Dehydration operates as an apex predator. It does not attack with teeth or claws. It thickens the blood. It shrinks the muscle tissue. It turns the brain into a shriveled sponge. Bowen felt the lethargy creeping into his joints. His tongue felt like a piece of coarse sandpaper wedged behind his teeth. His cracked ribs dictated his posture. He kept his left arm clamped tight against his torso, creating a rigid brace of bone and muscle. Every step sent a shockwave of white-hot pain through his chest cavity. He dragged his right boot, leaving a shallow trench in the limestone dust. He carried the heavy M1A rifle by the pistol grip, the barrel pointing at the dirt. The weapon weighed a ton. He unhooked the plastic canteen from his tactical belt. He unscrewed the cap. He shook the container next to his ear. Zero slosh. He tipped the nozzle against his cracked lips. A single warm drop of condensation hit his tongue. He tossed the plastic container into a patch of dead sagebrush. He shed the dead weight. Survival demands observation. A dying man looks at his boots. A living man reads the terrain. Bowen forced his head up. He studied the endless expanse of rock and scrub. He searched for anomalies. He hunted the subtle shifts in the brutal landscape. The wind shifted. A faint breeze carried a new texture. not the dry, metallic scent of heated rock. This carried the heavy, sour smell of wet clay and decaying organic matter. He adjusted his azimuth. He followed the scent. 2 miles of agonizing progress brought him to a geological fracture. The earth split open, creating a narrow slot canyon shadowed by towering granite slabs. A cluster of mesquite trees clung to the rim, their leaves retaining a desperate shade of green against the monochrome desert. Animal tracks converged at the edge of the fracture. Coyote paws. Javelina hooves. The indentations pointed toward the deep shadows. Bowen dropped to his hands and knees. He ignored the grinding protest of his fractured ribs. He crawled over the abrasive rock, approaching the edge of the depression. He peered over the rim. A natural cistern occupied the floor of the slot canyon 10 feet below. A hollowed-out limestone basin held a pool of dark, stagnant liquid. He did not scramble down the rock face. He stopped. He evaluated the geometry of the canyon. Chato possessed a tactical genius. The cartel enforcer understood the biology of the hunt. He knew his prey would require hydration. He knew the locations of every water hole in a 50-mile radius. A water source in the desert constitutes a natural choke point. Bowen scanned the deep shadows near the far side of the pool. A spark of orange light flared in the dark. A cartel ghost sat cross-legged on a flat granite slab overlooking the water. The man held an AR-15 assault rifle resting across his knees. He smoked a cigarette. The cherry illuminated his face with every drag. He wore digital camouflage fatigues and a heavy plate carrier. He maintained focus on the main trail leading into the depression. The guard expected a desperate, dying man to stumble into the open, blinded by thirst. Bowen retreated from the rim. He slid backward on his stomach, moving out of the guard's line of sight. He drew the Kilgore knife from the kydex sheath strapped to his thigh. The carbon steel blade possessed a matte finish. It caught zero light. It offered zero warning. He slung the M1A rifle across his back, tightening the canvas strap to prevent the weapon from striking the rocks. He needed both hands. He flanked the depression. He navigated the jagged limestone perimeter, moving toward the rock face directly behind the smoking Sicario. He commenced the descent. He placed his boots with absolute precision. He tested every foothold before committing his weight. Loose gravel constituted a death sentence. A single clattering rock would alert the guard, ending the stalk with a burst of 5.56 millimeters gunfire. The pain in his ribs spiked with every contortion. He clamped his jaw shut, locking the agony behind his teeth. He controlled his breathing, matching his exhalations to the subtle shifts of the desert wind. He reached the canyon floor. He stood 5 feet behind the seated guard. The smell of cheap tobacco smoke masked the scent of Bowen's sweat. The guard remained motionless, staring at the approach trail, the rifle resting loose in his hands. He tapped ash onto the stone. Bowen stepped forward. He bypassed the rifle. He bypassed the plate carrier. He clamped his left hand over the man's mouth and nose. He yanked the guard's head backward, exposing the throat. In the same fluid motion, he drove the Kilgore deep into the soft tissue beneath the jawline, angling the heavy steel blade upward, severing the brain stem. The guard's body seized. A violent, rigid spasm of pure electrical misfire. Bowen held the man tight against his chest, absorbing the kinetic shock. He locked his left arm, crushing the man's face against his tactical vest, muffling the death rattle. The guard's boots kicked the rock. The AR-15 slid off his knees, clattering against the granite. Bowen twisted the carbon steel blade, destroying the nerve cluster. The thrashing ceased. The body turned to dead weight. Bowen lowered the corpse to the floor of the canyon. He wiped the bloody knife blade clean on the dead man's camouflage uniform. He returned the weapon to its sheath. He ignored the dead ghost. He knelt beside the limestone basin. The water resembled used motor oil. A thick layer of green algae coated the surface. Skeletal remains of desert insects floated near the edges. Bowen swept the algae aside with the back of his hand. He cupped his palms and scooped the black liquid. He brought the water to his mouth. He drank. It tasted of ancient minerals and rotting vegetation. It carried the heavy, unmistakable tang of raw copper and iron. Blood in the water. A predator's kill or a cartel dumping ground. The source held zero relevance. The fluid sustained life. He swallowed. His stomach rebelled, a violent contraction threatening to purge the intake. He closed his eyes. He forced the muscles to accept the foul liquid. He scooped another handful. He drank again. The water hit his bloodstream. A fraction of the mental fog dissipated. The sandpaper texture left his tongue. He drank 3 more times. He forced himself to stop. Consuming too much stagnant water on an empty, dehydrated stomach induces severe vomiting. He needed the moisture to absorb, not evacuate. He stood up, wiping his wet chin with his leather glove. He walked over to the dead Sicario. He unclipped a 1-liter tactical canteen from the man's chest rig. He shook it. Full. He attached the container to his own belt. He picked up the guard's AR-15. He racked the slide, ejecting the chambered round. He tossed the empty rifle into the deep end of the stagnant pool. It sank into the black water, disappearing from the board. He unslung his M1A rifle. He checked the action, ensuring the dirt and dust avoided the breach. The water fueled the human machine. The machine required movement. He looked up at the pale gray sky. The sun threatened to break the horizon, bringing a new wave of brutal heat. He turned his back on the dead man and the bloody spring. He climbed out of the slot canyon, setting his sights on the southern horizon. Base Bravo waited in the distance. The reckoning demanded a full tank, and Bowen intended to deliver the payload. Chapter 16. The sun breached the eastern mesa like a copper coin dropped onto a blacksmith's anvil. The transition offered zero grace. Night vanished. The desert floor ignited, baking the chill from the air in a matter of minutes. Bowen Rhodes walked a dry wash, favoring his right leg. His left arm remained bound against his ribs, a crude splint of duct tape and denim protecting the cracked bone. The stolen cartel water sloshed in the plastic canteen on his hip, a rhythmic reminder of his continued survival. He stopped in the shadow of a massive sandstone monolith. He leaned his right shoulder against the cool stone and closed his eyes. A foot chase through the Sonora Desert operates on a deficit. The terrain steals energy, drains moisture, and demands absolute attention. Bowen possessed the stamina, but the math felt wrong. He had walked for 3 hours since the spring. He had crossed exposed salt flats and navigated dense thickets of catclaw acacia. He took deliberate anti-tracking measures. He walked backward through soft sand. He hopped between exposed bedrock plates. Yet, a prickle of electricity danced across the back of his neck. The sensation of being watched. He unslung the M1A rifle and pulled the Zeiss binoculars from his chest rig. He adjusted the focal rings, sweeping the ridgeline 3 miles to his rear. Heat shimmer distorted the horizon, turning the jagged peaks into a watery mirage. A flash of pure white light pierced the distortion. The glare lasted a fraction of a second. A reflection. Sun-striking coated optical glass. Bowen lowered the binoculars. The math corrected itself. The cartel ghosts did not rely on footprints in the dust. Chato utilized a dedicated spotter. A man occupying the extreme high ground, equipped with high-powered optics, painting Bowen's movements for the hunting parties on the valley floor. "You cannot outrun a radio wave," Bowen whispered to the empty wash. "You have to blind the broadcaster." He checked the topography. A mile ahead, the wash narrowed into a jagged bottleneck. Twin spires of red rock choked the passage, forcing any traveler into a 30-yard corridor. A natural ambush point. A place where an apex predator funnels its prey. Bowen decided to play the prey. He pushed off the sandstone monolith. He increased his pace, abandoning his stealth tactics. He kicked loose gravel. He snapped dead sagebrush branches. He left a trail a blind man could follow in a dust storm. He needed the spotter to track his vector. He needed the cartel eyes locked on the bottleneck. He reached the twin spires an hour later. The sun climbed higher, turning the canyon floor into a convection oven. Sweat soaked through his tactical vest, stinging the deep cut on his bicep. He chose the western spire. He climbed the backside, a brutal ascent over broken granite and brittle shale. The fractured ribs screamed with every upward pull. He ignored the fire in his chest, forcing his boots to find purchase, hauling the heavy rifle up the vertical incline. He reached a narrow ledge 50 feet above the canyon floor. The perch offered a commanding view of the southern approach and the dark recessed shadows between the spires. He prepared the deception. He stripped the blood-soaked denim jacket from his shoulders. He gathered a pile of dead tumbleweeds and arranged them behind a low boulder in the deep shade of the canyon floor. He draped the jacket over the brush, creating the unmistakable silhouette of a wounded man resting in the dark. He climbed back to his ledge. He wedged himself between two slabs of granite. He pulled a handful of red dust from a crevice and smeared it across the black metal of the M1A barrel, breaking up the weapon's outline. He dusted his face and shoulders, matching the color of the earth. He became a piece of the mountain. He rested the rifle stock against his shoulder. He settled his right eye behind the ACOG crosshairs. The wait began. The desert baked. Centipedes the size of a man's hand scurried across the hot stone inches from his face. A vulture circled high on a thermal updraft, a black speck waiting for the inevitable failure of the meat below. Bowen controlled his respiratory rate. He let his heart rate drop to a slow, steady thud. He ignored the thirst scratching at his throat. An hour passed. The shadows shortened. Movement materialized on the southern ridge. The spotter did not stumble into the trap. The man moved with the practiced grace of a professional stalker. He wore a ghillie suit woven with local flora, blending perfectly with the scrub brush. He carried a suppressed Mk-12 sniper rifle slung across his back. But the man relied too heavily on his technology. The spotter reached a flat slab of rock 400 yards from Bowen's position. He unclipped a heavy tripod from his gear. He locked the legs into the stone. He mounted a massive Swarovski spotting scope to the rig. A piece of glass worth more than a luxury sedan, capable of resolving a man's heartbeat at 1,000 yards. Bowen watched the spotter through the rifle optic. The man knelt behind the tripod. He adjusted the focus knob. He swept the canyon floor. The massive objective lens caught the sun, flashing a second burst of brilliant white light. The spotter found the decoy. The crosshairs locked onto the blood-soaked denim jacket resting in the shadows. The man reached to his shoulder. He depressed the transmit button on his tactical radio. Bowen could not hear the words, but he knew the message. The spotter called the strike team. He painted the target. He believed the hunt concluded. Hubris kills more professionals than bad luck. Bowen adjusted his hold. The distance measured 420 yards. A slight crosswind blew from west to east, rustling the sagebrush. Bowen dialed 2 clicks of windage into the optic turret. He elevated the crosshairs, aiming 2 inches above the massive glass lens of the spotting scope. The spotter kept his right eye pressed to the eyepiece, studying the decoy, entirely consumed by the false image. "Peekaboo," Bowen muttered. He exhaled, pausing his breath at the bottom of the cycle. He applied 3 pounds of pressure to the trigger. The sear broke. The M1A roared, shattering the canyon silence. The recoil slammed into Bowen's injured shoulder, sending a fresh wave of agony through his collarbone. The 168 grain .308 hollow point crossed the 400 yards in less than half a second. The round struck the objective lens of the Swarovski scope, dead center. The ballistic impact pulverized the expensive optical glass. The bullet traveled through the internal prism array, stripping the metal housing, maintaining its kinetic velocity. The round exited the eyepiece and entered the spotter's right orbital socket. The man's head snapped backward, a violent terminal whiplash. The kinetic force lifted his body off the ground. He crashed backward into the dust, pulling the heavy tripod and the shattered scope down on top of his ruined skull. The echo of the gunshot rolled down the canyon walls, fading into the heat shimmer. Bowen maintained his sight picture for a full minute. The ghillie suit remained motionless. The spotter joined the dust. A sharp burst of static erupted from the Motorola radio Bowen carried in his chest rig. "Ojos," a voice demanded in Spanish. "Report." The strike team sought confirmation. They heard the gunshot. They required their eyes. Bowen pulled the radio from his pouch. He pressed the transmit button. "Your eyes are closed, Chato," Bowen said, injecting a flat, conversational tone into the frequency. "The optometrist says the prescription is permanent." A heavy silence answered him. The cartel enforcer digested the intelligence. The loss of the spotter blinded the hunting party. The tactical advantage vanished. "You prolong the inevitable, Marshal," Chato's voice crackled back, void of emotion. "You wander in a maze. We own the exits." "I possess a map," Bowen replied. "And I know where Kilgore parked the trucks. See you at Base Bravo." He released the button and shoved the radio back into its pouch. Let Chato hurry. Let the ghosts abandon their careful stalking and rush to defend the final prize. Haste breeds mistakes. Bowen backed away from the ledge. He slung the rifle and began the slow, agonizing climb down the backside of the spire. He had blinded the Cyclops. He possessed the freedom to move, and he intended to exploit the opening. The sun hammered the desert floor, but the path forward belonged to the man holding the rifle. Chapter 17. The sun hit the horizon and shattered, bleeding a bruised smear of violet and rust across the western sky. The desert surrendered the day's heat in visible waves. Bowen Rhodes tracked the diesel exhaust. Kilgore had salvaged a fraction of his fleet from the canyon slaughterhouse. 2 armored Kenworth transports and a trailing supply truck limped toward the border. The heavy machines chewed the soft earth, leaving a trench a blind man could follow. They fought the steep grade of a sprawling limestone plateau, their engines grinding a harsh metallic complaint against the incline. Bowen closed the distance on foot. The trailing vehicle lacked the armor plating of the Kenworths. A modified Ford F-650 box truck. The suspension groaned under the weight of mobile kitchen equipment, spare tires, and heavy ammunition crates. The driver rode the clutch. Black soot coughed from the exhaust stack in rhythmic bursts. The incline reduced the truck's speed to a mechanical crawl. Bowen holstered the Glock 19. He slung the heavy M1A rifle across his back, securing the canvas strap tight against his chest rig. He ignored the fire burning in his fractured ribs. He broke from the scrub brush and sprinted. He matched the crawling pace of the F-650. He reached the passenger side. He gripped the heavy steel brace of the side view mirror with his left hand. He grabbed the chrome door handle with his right. He swung his boots onto the diamond plate running board. He pressed his thumb against the latch mechanism. He pulled the door open and threw his body into the cab. A wave of refrigerated air hit his face, carrying the dense odors of raw onions, stale sweat, and gun oil. The driver slammed both boots on the brake pedal. Bowen drove his right elbow into the man's jawbone. Teeth cracked. The driver slumped against the steering wheel. The heavy truck lurched, stalled, and died on the incline. The sudden silence rang in the cab. Bowen drew the Glock. He leveled the tritium sights at the driver's face. "Keep your foot on the brake," Bowen said. "Start the engine. Put it in first gear. We maintain the momentum." The driver spat a mouthful of blood and shattered enamel onto the rubber floor mat. He wore a stained white apron over a Kevlar plate carrier. A massive stainless steel meat cleaver rested on the dashboard, next to a mounted GPS unit. A short-barreled shotgun sat wedged between the seats. The man stared at the muzzle of the Glock. He turned the ignition key. The diesel engine roared back to life. He engaged the clutch and wrestled the heavy gearshift into first. The truck resumed its agonizing crawl up the grade. "Who the hell are you?" the cook demanded. His voice carried the thick gravel of a lifelong smoker. You possess a death wish, jumping a convoy. The health inspector, Bowen said. He kept the pistol aimed at the center of the man's apron. Keep your hands at 10 and 2. What do they call you? Hollis. Listen to me, Hollis. Red Kilgore runs 2 armored transports a mile ahead of this position. He carries $80 million in black budget cash. You carry frozen steaks, spare spark plugs, and a shotgun you cannot reach. You occupy the bait car. Hollis tightened his grip on the steering wheel. The knuckles turned white under the grease. Red protects the crew. We push for base Bravo. The airstrip waits. Red protects the cash, Bowen corrected. The cartel hunts this convoy. They track the dust. They follow the noise. They possess night vision and suppressed rifles. When the ghosts catch this fleet, they will hit the tail first. They will butcher you, Hollis. They will strip this truck for parts, and Red Kilgore will not tap his brakes. You lie. Look in your side mirror, Bowen said. Hollis shifted his eyes. 3 distinct plumes of dust rose from the desert floor 2 miles to the rear. The plumes moved with synchronized precision, closing the gap. The cartel strike teams organized their pursuit. Fear broke the mercenary bravado. Sweat beaded on Hollis's forehead, tracing tracks through the dirt on his face. What do you want? Hollis asked. I require a diversion, Bowen said. I need the cartel focused on a specific target. I need a clear path to Kilgore. Bowen reached into his tactical vest. He produced a handful of heavy-duty industrial zip ties. The thick black plastic strips required wire cutters to break. Take your left hand off the wheel, Bowen commanded. Place it against the center spoke. Hollis hesitated. He glanced at the meat cleaver on the dash. Bowen pressed the muzzle of the Glock against Hollis's right kneecap. You cook with your hands. I suggest you keep them functional. Center spoke. Hollis moved his hand. Bowen looped a zip tie over the thick wrist, securing it to the steel core of the steering wheel. He pulled the plastic tail tight. The ratchet mechanism rasped a sharp, permanent lock. He repeated the process with the right wrist. Hollis sat bound to the machine, the steering column dictating his posture. You intend to kill me, Hollis said, his voice dropping to a panicked whisper. I intend to employ you, Bowen said. Bowen picked up the VHF radio microphone from the center console. He keyed the transmit button and held the plastic receiver to Hollis's mouth. The ghosts monitor these frequencies, Bowen said. Tell them a story, Hollis. Tell them Kilgore double-crossed his own men. Tell them Kilgore moved the bearer bonds and the cash into the supply truck to throw off the pursuit. Scream it. Make them believe the fortune sits in the back of this box. They will torture me. Hollis thrashed against the plastic restraints. They will chase you, Bowen said. The pursuit offers a chance of survival. A bullet in the knee offers 0. Make the call. Bowen drove the pistol barrel an inch deep into the soft tissue behind the kneecap. Hollis screamed. He leaned into the microphone. Fantasmas. Listen to me. Hollis roared, panic lending absolute authenticity to his voice. Red screwed us. The armored transports carry empty pallets. The cash is in the box truck. The tail vehicle. I possess the 80 million. I surrender the cargo for safe passage. Bowen released the transmit button. He tossed the microphone onto the floorboard. A compelling performance, Bowen said. He searched the cab. He found a heavy steel ammunition can sitting behind the passenger seat. He hauled the green metal box forward. It weighed 40 pounds, packed dense with 5.56 millimeters cartridges. Shift your right foot, Bowen ordered. Hollis complied, pressing his boot flat against the accelerator pedal. Bowen wedged the heavy steel ammo can over the driver's boot, trapping the pedal against the floorboard. The diesel engine screamed, the RPM needle burying itself in the red. The truck surged forward, fighting the governor, rocketing toward the crest of the plateau. Bowen reached across the steering column. He grabbed the gear shift. He slammed the transmission into high gear. The Ford F-650 hit the flat expanse of the plateau. The terrain shifted from broken rock to a vast cracked salt flat. The truck accelerated, hitting 60 miles an hour. "Turn the wheel," Bowen shouted over the roar of the over-revving engine. "Hard right." Hollis hauled the bound steering wheel down. The heavy truck careened off the rutted trail, launching into the virgin salt flat. A massive plume of white dust exploded behind the rear duals. The vehicle headed east, abandoning the southern vector toward Base Bravo. Bowen grabbed the meat cleaver from the dashboard. He shoved the blade into his tactical belt. He slung the M1A rifle tight against his back. "Maintain your heading, Hollis," Bowen said. "The ghosts love a good chase." Bowen opened the passenger door. The wind howled into the cab, tearing at his clothes. The salt flat blurred beneath the running board, a deadly strip of white-hot friction. He climbed out of the cab. He stood on the diamond plate step, gripping the roof rack with his left hand. He judged the speed. He judged the terrain. A patch of soft sand approached, interrupting the hard salt crust. He pushed backward. He launched himself from the moving truck. He tucked his chin to his chest and wrapped his arms around his head, forming a tight human sphere. He hit the soft sand. The kinetic energy grabbed his body, sending him into a violent series of rolls. The world spun in a chaotic blur of blue sky and white earth. The ceramic plates in his vest absorbed the impacts. The heavy canvas of his gear protected his skin from the abrasive salt. He slid to a halt, face down in the dirt. He lay motionless for 10 seconds, letting the world stop spinning. He pushed himself up to his hands and knees. He tasted salt and copper. He checked his limbs. Bruised muscle, scraped leather, but no new broken bones. The rifle survived the impact. He stood up. He looked east. The Ford F-650 roared across the salt flat, a massive, accelerating target dragging a mile-long tail of white dust. He looked south. The 3 cartel dust plumes altered their course. The ghosts took the bait. They abandoned the trail of the armored transports. They turned their machines east, hunting the screaming cook and the phantom 80 million. Bowen turned his back on the distraction. He looked down the rutted southern trail. The deep tire tracks of the 2 surviving Kenworths led straight toward the horizon. Kilgore marched toward his fortress, stripped of his rearguard, stripped of his cartel shadow. The board sat clear. The isolation required for a final reckoning materialized. Bowen brushed the white salt from his jeans, checked the action on his Glock, and began the long march toward the front of the line. Chapter 18. The cook bought me 20 minutes. Bowen spoke the words to a dead agave plant. He stood on the edge of the salt flat, watching the eastern horizon. The 3 cartel dust plumes merged into a single, massive cloud. The cloud halted. The movement ceased. Chato caught the Ford F-650. The cartel enforcer possessed zero tolerance for deception. He would open the cargo box, discover the frozen steaks, and execute the screaming cook. The realization would follow a second later. The ghosts would turn their machines around. They would hunt the man who orchestrated the diversion. Bowen adjusted the heavy canvas satchel, digging into his left shoulder. He looted the bag from the passenger floorboard of the supply truck before launching himself into the dirt. The canvas smelled of old canvas and chemical nitrates. It held 10 sticks of commercial Tovex water gel explosive, a box of copper blasting caps, and a heavy spool of green safety fuse. Kilgore brought mining equipment to crack subterranean vaults or destroy evidence. Bowen intended to repurpose the tools. He turned his back on the eastern salt flat. He followed the deep tire treads of Kilgore's 2 surviving Kenworths. The flat terrain yielded to a rising geological formation. A spine of jagged limestone jutted from the desert floor, an ancient coral reef thrust upward by tectonic violence. The convoy trail cut straight through the center of the formation. Bowen entered the pass. The temperature dropped 10 degrees in the deep shade. The canyon walls rose 200 feet straight up. The passage narrowed, creating a perfect, lethal bottleneck. 2 heavy transport trucks could navigate the gap, but they would scrape their side mirrors against the stone. Bowen studied the architecture of the gorge. He searched for the weak point. 50 yards into the pass, a massive overhang dominated the western wall. Thousands of tons of fractured limestone hung suspended over the trail, supported by a single load-bearing keystone near the base of the cliff. Water erosion and centuries of wind had undercut the foundation. The rock structure required a final push to surrender to gravity. Bowen dropped the canvas satchel in the dirt. He unslung the M1A rifle and leaned it against a boulder. He approached the keystone. A deep, horizontal fissure ran behind the main support column. He reached his leather-gloved hand into the crack. The space felt cool and damp. It offered the perfect containment chamber. Explosives require confinement to multiply their destructive force. He knelt beside the satchel. He unbuckled the leather straps. He pulled the Tovex sausages from the bag. The thick plastic tubes felt heavy, dense with destructive potential. He wedged the first tube deep into the limestone fissure. He packed the remaining 9 sticks around it, creating a concentrated charge against the structural spine of the overhang. He required a detonator. He opened the small cardboard box. He extracted a single copper blasting cap. He handled the small metal cylinder with absolute reverence. A sudden impact or a stray spark would sever his fingers. He pulled a length of green safety fuse from the spool. He measured 3 feet. A burn rate of 40 seconds per foot offered him 2 minutes to clear the blast radius. He cut the fuse with his cob bar knife. He inserted the exposed powder core into the open end of the blasting cap. He placed the cap between the jaws of his lineman's pliers and crimped the metal, securing the fuse. He slid the rigged cap into the center of the Tovex bundle. A high-pitched mechanical whine echoed off the canyon walls. Bowen froze. He dropped his hands. The sound originated from the southern approach. A 2-stroke engine running at maximum RPM. A single vehicle, traveling far ahead of the main cartel force. An outrider. Bowen shoved the remaining safety fuse into the canvas bag and kicked it behind a rock. He drew the heavy stainless steel meat cleaver from his tactical belt. He pressed his back against the limestone column, hiding in the deep shadow beside the rigged explosives. The outrider entered the pass. The ghost rode a stripped-down Honda dirt bike. The suspension absorbed the brutal ruts of the trail. The rider wore a lightweight Kevlar vest over a black t-shirt. He steered with his left hand. His right hand rested on the pistol grip of a compact Scorpion submachine gun dangling from a single-point chest sling. The scout possessed sharp instincts. He slowed the motorcycle. He scanned the canyon walls. He noted the disturbed gravel near the overhang. He dragged his boots in the dirt, bringing the Honda to a halt 10 feet from Bowen's position. He killed the engine. The sudden silence amplified the sound of the scout drawing a breath. The man swung his leg over the saddle. He raised the Scorpion, the wire stock braced against his shoulder. He took a step toward the limestone column. Bowen launched himself from the shadows. He closed the gap in a single, explosive stride. He brought the meat cleaver down in a brutal, diagonal arc. The heavy stainless steel blade carried the momentum of a falling hatchet. The edge bit deep into the scout's right collarbone, shearing through the Kevlar shoulder strap, shattering the clavicle, and severing the subclavian artery. The scout opened his mouth to scream. Blood filled his throat, choking the sound. The submachine gun slipped from his deadened fingers. The man collapsed backward, his boots tangling in the dirt bike's frame. The heavy machine crashed to the gravel on top of him. A fountain of bright arterial blood sprayed the dust. Bowen placed his boot on the scout's chest. He gripped the heavy plastic handle of the cleaver and wrenched the blade free of the bone. He wiped the crimson steel across the dead man's shirt. A deep, synchronized roar vibrated through the soles of Bowen's boots. The main force arrived. The cartel convoy approached the mouth of the canyon. Heavy V8 engines, aggressive mud tires, the rattle of mounted weapons. Chato brought the cavalry. Bowen shoved the meat cleaver into his belt. He retrieved a book of cardboard matches from his vest pocket. He stepped over the dead scout and the tangled motorcycle. He reached the end of the green safety fuse dangling from the rock face. He struck a match. The sulfur head flared. He touched the flame to the exposed powder core. The fuse caught instantly, spitting a violent jet of white sparks and acrid smoke. The fire began its relentless 2-minute march toward the copper blasting cap. Bowen grabbed the M1A rifle. He turned his back on the bomb. He ran. He targeted the northern rock face, seeking the high ground. He found a series of staggered granite shelves leading up the cliff. He slung the rifle and climbed. The fractured ribs ground against each other, shooting spikes of nausea into his brain. He forced his arms to pull, dragging his body weight up the vertical incline. He reached a flat plateau, 80 feet above the canyon floor. He collapsed onto his stomach, gasping for air, clutching his injured chest. Down in the pass, the cartel strike force rolled into view. 2 heavily modified Ford Raptors flanked a black-armored Chevrolet Suburban. The vehicles bristled with weapons and men. They moved in a tactical formation, sweeping the canyon walls with mounted spotlights. The lead Raptor spotted the downed motorcycle and the bleeding outrider. The driver slammed the brakes. The heavy truck skidded to a halt in the center of the trail, directly beneath the massive undercut limestone overhang. The other 2 vehicles stacked up behind it, boxing themselves into the kill zone. Doors opened. Sicarios poured into the canyon, their suppressed rifles raised. They shouted orders in Spanish, forming a defensive perimeter around the dead scout. The green safety fuse burned its final inch. The white sparks vanished into the rock face. The Tovex detonated. The explosion defied sound. It registered as a physical pressure wave that punched the air out of the canyon. The brisance of the commercial water gel shattered the load-bearing keystone into powder. A localized earthquake shook the plateau beneath Bowen's chest. The limestone cliff face groaned, a sound of ancient stone tearing apart. The massive overhang detached from the mountain. Thousands of tons of jagged rock, dirt, and petrified coral plummeted in a catastrophic freefall. The cartel Sicarios looked up. They possessed 0 time to scream. The mountain crushed the lead Ford Raptor. The roof collapsed, the chassis flattened, and the tires exploded under the unfathomable weight. The avalanche of boulders swallowed the dead scout, the motorcycle, and 6 cartel gunmen in a fraction of a second. The falling debris created a massive displacement of air. A cloud of pulverized white limestone exploded outward, engulfing the remaining cartel vehicles in a suffocating, blinding fog. Boulders the size of cargo vans bounced off the canyon walls, crushing the front end of the armored Suburban. The thunder rolled away, leaving a chaotic symphony of settling rock, hissing radiators, and the muffled shouts of the survivors trapped on the wrong side of the collapse. Bowen crawled to the edge of the plateau. He looked down. The pass ceased to exist. A 50-foot-high wall of jagged, impassable rubble blocked the gorge from wall to wall. The mountain had reclaimed the trail. Chato and the surviving ghosts remained trapped on the eastern side of the barricade. They faced an impossible climb over unstable debris. They could not bring their vehicles. They could not bring their heavy weapons. Their pursuit ground to an absolute halt. Kilgore's Kenworths rolled free on the western side. The board shrank. The players separated. Bowen pushed himself to his feet. He dusted the white powder from the black stock of his rifle. He closed the road. He checked the perimeter. He turned west, following the clean, unbroken tire tracks leading toward the setting moon and the fortress known as Base Bravo. Chapter 19. The desert morning offered zero mercy. The sun climbed the eastern sky, a relentless white-hot anvil hammering the Sonora Flats. The temperature pushed past 100 degrees. Bowen Rhodes walked the tire ruts left by Kilgore's 2 surviving Kenworth transports. He maintained a steady, measured pace. He placed his boots flat, absorbing the shock in his knees to spare his fractured ribs. The pain in his chest reduced his breathing to shallow, calculated sips of dry air. The dermabond on his slashed left bicep pulled tight against his skin, a rigid reminder of the water station. The heavy M1A rifle hung across his chest. His right hand rested on the pistol grip. Sweat cut tracks through the limestone dust coating his face. The Motorola radio in his chest pouch vibrated. A sharp burst of static broke the vast, empty silence. Bowen stopped. He unclipped his stolen cartel canteen, took a mouthful of the stagnant water, and swallowed the metallic liquid. He pulled the radio from the nylon pouch. He pressed the transmit button. "The mountain holds," Bowen said. "Take a detour." A low hum of electronic interference preceded the voice. The signal possessed absolute clarity. Chato had scaled the rubble of the collapsed pass. He occupied the high ground. He held the transmitter. "You possess a talent for demolition, Marshal Rhodes," Chato said. The cartel enforcer spoke perfect, unaccented English. The voice carried a terrifying stillness. It lacked anger. It lacked urgency. It sounded like a mortician discussing casket linings. "You buried 12 of my men under 1,000 tons of rock. You cost my organization a fortune in hardware." "Send the bill to Washington," Bowen replied. "I operate on an independent budget." "I hold zero interest in your government," Chato said. "I hold interest in the man who bled my blood. I found the water station. I found the boy." Bowen looked at the heat shimmer dancing on the horizon. "Your scout lacked manners." He attacked a federal officer. He met the standard consequence. "He carried my name," Chato said. "He carried my future." "He carries dirt now," Bowen said. "He brought a knife. I brought a knife. The outcome belongs to the desert." A pause stretched across the frequency. The silence felt heavy, pregnant with the promise of future violence. Bowen pictured the cartel boss standing atop the crushed limestone, staring west, hunting the lone black figure walking the salt flat. "Red Kilgore stole $80 million from my partners," Chato continued, his voice dropping a fraction of an octave. "We hunted the mercenary to reclaim the property. The objective shifted. The money holds zero value today. The priority belongs to the blood debt. You wear the mark, Marshal." "Get in line," Bowen said. "Kilgore holds the first ticket." "Kilgore represents a temporary obstacle," Chato said. "Base Bravo sits 5 miles from your current position. Kilgore possesses 30 men behind concrete walls. You walk into a meat grinder with a single rifle and cracked bones. You intend to die on his doorstep." "I intend to knock," Bowen said. "They will slaughter you," Chato promised. "They will leave your corpse for the vultures. That outcome denies me my right. I require you alive, Marshal. I require your nervous system intact. I possess specialists in Sinaloa. They own instruments. They possess the knowledge to keep a man breathing for 2 weeks while they strip his skin. I promise you a slow, agonizing education in the cost of royal blood." Bowen adjusted his grip on the radio. He wiped a drop of sweat from his chin with a leather-gloved thumb. He visualized the forms in his office back in El Paso. Use of force reports. Incident logs. The bureaucracy of death. "I despise paperwork, Chato," Bowen said. "The forms require triplicate copies. They demand narrative explanations for expenditures of ammunition. A slow death requires a mountain of administrative oversight. You joke in the shadow of the grave." "I state a fact," Bowen said. "I plan to shoot you in the face and skip the paperwork entirely. It saves ink." "You possess arrogance." "I possess a .308, Bowen corrected. "Climb the rocks, Chato. Bring the ghosts. The road to Base Bravo remains open." "We cross the rubble now," Chato said, the digital signal beginning to degrade as the cartel boss descended the rock face. "We bring the fire. Keep breathing, Marshal. Reserve your lungs for the screaming." The connection severed. The radio emitted a flat, dead tone. Bowen shoved the Motorola back into the chest pouch. He secured the Velcro flap. The parley concluded. The terms of engagement sat finalized. The three-way war funneled toward a singular, fixed point on the map. He resumed his march. The flat desert floor began to roll, transforming into a series of shallow baked ravines. He crested a small rise and stopped. The heat shimmer broke. The horizon hardened into solid shapes. Base Bravo occupied a sprawling depression in the Sonora Flats. Kilgore had constructed a fortress. Thick reinforced concrete walls formed a massive square perimeter. Guard towers anchored the four corners, topped with tinted ballistic glass and heavy machine gun mounts. A sprawling tarmac occupied the center of the compound, dominated by a massive corrugated steel aircraft hangar. A twin-engine cargo plane sat parked on the runway. The escape vehicle. The ticket to the Cayman Islands. The two surviving Kenworth transport trucks sat parked near the hangar doors. Mercenaries swarmed the vehicles like angry ants. They unloaded the pallets of untraceable black-budget cash, using forklifts to transfer the fortune into the belly of the waiting aircraft. Kilgore operated on a compressed timeline. He knew the ghosts approached. He knew the lone marshal hunted his shadow. The mercenary commander traded defense for speed. Bowen studied the perimeter. He dropped to one knee, ignoring the sharp protest in his ribs. He pulled the Zeiss binoculars from his rig. The guard towers held men, but their attention focused inward. They watched the cache. They watched the frantic loading process. Paranoia infected Kilgore's ranks. A fortune of that magnitude turns brothers into predators. The perimeter watch suffered. Bowen lowered the glass. He possessed zero backup. He carried an empty canteen, a bruised body, and a rifle coated in limestone dust. He faced an entrenched private army and an incoming cartel execution squad. The mathematics of survival offered a 0% probability. He pushed himself up from the dirt. He racked the bolt of the M1A, stripping a heavy brass cartridge from the magazine and sliding it into the chamber. The steel locked with a satisfying final clack. Mathematics held zero jurisdiction in the Sonora desert. Bowen stepped off the rise. He marched toward the concrete walls, embracing the heat, carrying the reckoning J.D. Miller demanded. Chapter 20. The concrete wall radiated the stored heat of 100 desert afternoons. Bowen pressed his back against the rough aggregate. He tasted salt and copper. His fractured ribs ground together, a chorus of jagged bone demanding rest. He ignored the protest. He required one final exertion. He gripped the top edge of the perimeter wall with leather-clad fingers. He hauled his body upward. The razor wire coiled along the top rim snagged his tactical vest, tearing the heavy canvas. Bowen shifted his weight, clearing the steel barbs, and dropped onto the tarmac inside Base Bravo. He landed in a crouch. He kept his boots flat, absorbing the kinetic shock. The auxiliary power unit of the twin-engine cargo plane screamed a high-pitched mechanical whine. The noise blanketed the compound, drowning the sound of his arrival. He navigated the maze of stacked wooden crates and metal shipping containers. The air smelled of aviation kerosene, melting asphalt, and hot rubber. The two surviving Kenworth transports sat empty near the open hangar doors. A forklift idled on the tarmac. Kilgore's mercenaries had finished the transfer. The black-budget cash sat secured in the belly of the aircraft. Bowen drew the Glock 19. He left the heavy M1A rifle slung across his back. The tight quarters around the aircraft demanded a short barrel and rapid target acquisition. He moved from the shadow of a rusted shipping container to the massive landing gear of the cargo plane. He pressed his shoulder against the black rubber tire. The heat from the brake rotors washed over his face. Voices drifted down the aluminum loading ramp. The timeline is dead red. You promised a clean extraction. The voice did not belong to a mercenary. It carried the polished, authoritative cadence of a man accustomed to giving orders behind a mahogany desk. I lost half my crew in a canyon, Red Kilgore spat back. The mercenary commander sounded ragged, his iron control fraying at the edges. A lone marshal and a cartel execution squad decided to crash the party. The extraction is happening right now. Start the main engines. We renegotiate the split, the polished voice demanded. You drew extreme heat. The Federal Bureau will swarm this sector by sunrise. I require an additional 20% to cover the bureaucratic exposure. Bowen stepped around the landing gear. He walked up the aluminum ramp. The cargo bay resembled a bank vault. Pallets of shrink-wrapped $100 bills lined the fuselage, secured with heavy nylon cargo straps. Red Kilgore stood in the center of the bay. He gripped a custom 1911 pistol in his right hand. A ragged bandage wrapped his left forearm. The second man wore a tailored charcoal suit, a crisp white shirt and a silk tie. A gold U.S. Marshal's star rested on his belt next to a holstered Sig Sauer. Captain Miller, Bowen's superior officer, out of the El Paso field office. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together. J.D. Miller died bleeding in the dirt next to a water tank, Bowen said, his voice cutting through the mechanical whine of the plane. Both men spun toward the ramp. Bowen held the Glock leveled at Kilgore's chest. He stepped into the cargo bay, keeping the high ground on the inclined aluminum surface. "You ordered a hit on your own brother, Captain," Bowen said. "You fed the logistics coordinates to a mercenary crew to steal an untraceable federal slush fund." Captain Miller narrowed his eyes. He did not reach for his weapon. He clasped his hands behind his back, adopting a posture of supreme command. "J.D. lacked vision, Bowen," the captain said. "He intended to return the surplus capital to the Treasury. A pathetic waste of resources. The government prints paper. We secure our futures. Lower the weapon, Deputy. You operate far outside your jurisdiction." "I resigned my commission at the water station," Bowen said. "Shoot him, Red," Miller commanded. Kilgore raised the 1911. Bowen fired first. He did not aim for the center of mass. He dropped the muzzle a fraction of an inch. He squeezed the trigger. The 9mm hollow point round shattered Kilgore's right kneecap. The hydrostatic shock pulverized the patella. Bone fragments and synovial fluid sprayed the aluminum floor. Kilgore screamed. The sound possessed a primal, tearing quality. His leg collapsed. He hit the cargo deck hard, dropping his pistol. He clutched his ruined knee, writhing in the narrow aisle between the pallets of cash. Captain Miller froze. The color drained from his face, leaving his skin a pale, sickly gray. His hands trembled against the fabric of his tailored trousers. "You possess a habit of talking when the situation requires silence, Captain," Bowen said. He kept the Glock aimed at the senior officer. Bowen walked past the writhing mercenary. He reached a heavy canvas duffel bag sitting near the cockpit door. Kilgore's personal stash. Bowen crouched, keeping his eyes on Miller. He unzipped the bag. Stacks of banded hundreds filled the interior. Untraceable probate cash. The spoils of war. Bowen grabbed the heavy nylon handles. He stood up, hoisting the bag over his left shoulder. He guarded his fractured ribs against the dead weight. "You intend to steal the evidence," Miller stated, attempting to inject authority back into his voice. "I intend to collect a pension," Bowen corrected. Bowen stepped backward down the aisle. He reached the top of the loading ramp. He turned the Glock toward the left wall of the fuselage. He aimed at a cluster of hydraulic lines feeding the aircraft's landing gear and rear ramp mechanism. He fired 3 rapid shots. The bullets severed the braided steel hoses. Red hydraulic fluid sprayed the cargo bay in a high-pressure mist. The aluminum ramp groaned, decoupled from its lifting mechanism, and slammed down against the tarmac, locked in the open position. The landing gear sagged. The aircraft crippled itself, incapable of taking flight. "You grounded the plane," Miller shouted, stepping toward the ramp. "I secured your future," Bowen said. He walked backward down the ramp, his boots finding the hot concrete of the tarmac. He reached the bottom and stopped. He looked up at the 2 men in the cargo bay. Kilgore moaned, a puddle of blood expanding around his shattered leg. Miller stood paralyzed, watching his Cayman Island retirement dissolve into a nightmare. "A cartel strike team breached the eastern perimeter 2 minutes ago," Bowen informed them. "El Chato leads the ghosts. They hold a blood debt. They seek the man who killed their prince. I suggest you tell them Kilgore pulled the trigger." Miller's eyes went wide. The distant, unmistakable crackle of suppressed automatic gunfire echoed across the tarmac. The cartel initiated the assault on the guard towers. "You cannot leave us here," Miller demanded. "We represent federal law enforcement." "You represent meat," Bowen said. "The wolves possess an appetite. The state police will arrive in an hour to clean the bones. I left an anonymous tip on the highway." Bowen turned his back on the cargo plane. He did not run. He walked with a deliberate, even stride toward a sleek black Dodge Charger parked near the perimeter fence, Miller's unmarked cruiser. He opened the trunk and tossed the heavy canvas duffel bag inside. The untraceable cash landed with a solid thud. He slammed the lid shut. He opened the driver's side door and slid into the leather seat. He tossed the M1A rifle onto the passenger side. He keyed the ignition. The powerful V8 engine roared to life, a stark contrast to the utilitarian rattle of the diesel trucks. He engaged the air conditioning. He dialed the fan to the maximum setting. A blast of freezing air hit his face, cooling the sweat and the limestone dust. Gunfire erupted from the eastern wall. Heavy explosions rocked the hangar. Chato's ghosts brought the promised fire. Bowen shifted the transmission into drive. He steered the Charger toward the western gate. He hit the accelerator. The muscle car surged forward, shattering the wooden security barrier, launching out of the compound and onto the open desert highway. He rolled the window down an inch. The scent of burning aviation fuel and cordite faded, replaced by the crisp, clean scent of the morning desert. The sun crested the jagged peaks of the eastern mesa, washing the Arizona flats in a brilliant, blinding gold. Bowen adjusted the rearview mirror, watching the column of black smoke rise from Base Bravo. He turned his eyes forward. He rested his right hand on the steering wheel, letting the powerful machine eat the miles, driving straight into the sunrise. The end.